Chapter 849. Outside of the capital of blazing flames, Wu-Ming carried Vera out of the portal and flew in a random direction. One had to know that most of the land in the North District was barren land, and so was the outer sect of the 54545 division. Therefore, there was no need to deliberately find a barren land to fight Maxwell, because places that were not cities were basically barren. My bride! Let go of my bride! The voice was heard before the person could be seen. There were some ripples in the space. In the midst of the distortion, Maxwell appeared at the place where Wu-Ming had appeared before. Looking at Wu-Ming's departing figure, Maxwell's figure flashed, and along with the distortion of space, Maxwell disappeared again. On Wu-Ming's side, seeing that it was about time, he stopped. This place was far enough from the capital of blazing flames, and the surrounding land was barren. After landing on the ground, Wu-Ming let go of Vera, who was blushing in his arms. "Vera, can you leave for a while?" Wu-Ming said gently to Vera. Vera tilted her head in confusion at first, then nodded silently. She turned around and waved her hand, opening a door, the realm door. "Villo, be careful." After showing concern for Wu-Ming, Vera jumped into the realm door with a blushing face and left this place. This period of time together has been an unexpected gain. Wu-Ming smiled and shrugged. Yes, that's right. Wu-Ming was referring to pure friendship. However, without waiting for Wu-Ming to think more, the space not far from Wu-Ming distorted, and Maxwell appeared in front of Wu-Ming. Maxwell, who appeared in front of Wu-Ming, did not attack, but looked around for Vera's figure. In the end, Maxwell looked at Wu-Ming with an extremely gloomy expression. "Where's my bride?" Wu-Ming smiled slightly. "Of course, she was sent to my bridal chamber." This sentence was like a fuse, causing Maxwell's eyes to suddenly bulge out, and his mental state became even more abnormal. This moment. It was as if the pain that Maxwell had suffered from Wu-Ming's attack had manifested. Maxwell howled at the top of his lungs. "Kill you! Kill you! Kill you! Kill you! Kill you! Kill you! Kill you!" The ice and fire instantly arrived in front of Wu-Ming. They were like hunting dogs, frantically biting at Wu-Ming. However, "Haven't you learned your lesson? Maxwell, didn't I tell you?" Wu-Ming raised a hand as he spoke. In an instant, a large amount of mana surged and burst out from Wu-Ming's palm, blasting the man-eating hound into pieces. This kind of attack is completely useless? In the face of Maxwell's attack, Wu-Ming only needed to compress his own mana and release it to break it. Yes, it was a simple release of magic power. I have to say, as a 4-digit demon king, you're really degrading yourself. Other than the fact that his immortality was more than 4 digits, Wu-Ming really could not see how Maxwell qualified as a 4-digit demon king. However, Maxwell also realized that Wu-Ming was looking down on him. Therefore he, who was basically blinded by anger, was ready to use his trump card. Maxwell waved his hand, and there was another distortion in space. Individuals appeared one after another around Wu-Ming, appearing one after another, like the twinkling stars in the sky. Those were the clones of Absolute Evil, a pure white 2-headed dragon army. And there were a lot of them. The surrounding desolate land was filled with white figures, and it seemed that they were no less than the Absolute Evil clones that attacked the Eastern District. In fact, they were even more numerous. Sure enough, these Absolute Evil clones are your doing. Thinking of the 2-headed dragons that attacked No Name, Wu-Ming was slightly angry. If Wu-Ming was not there, perhaps the entire No Name would have suffered. As a member of No Name, Wu-Ming would not allow it. But let me tell you, these things are all defeated by me. Even if the number was much more than last time, Wu-Ming was confident that he would not be killed or injured by these things. However, what he needed to worry about was that he could not let an Absolute Evil clone run into the city of raging flames. Wu-Ming could not imagine the consequences of an irrational existence with the power of a deity entering the city. At such a close distance, you won't have a chance. Without waiting for Maxwell to finish speaking, the Absolute Evil clones rushed towards Wu-Ming as if they had received an order. Indeed, as Maxwell said, the distance was too close, and Wu-Ming did not have time to chant. However, Wu-Ming's 12 clones could be instantaneously cast. But my ability is not limited to authority. In an instant, the absolute evil clones buried Wu Ming, forming a small mountain of absolute evil clones. However, immediately after that, several rays of light came out from the absolute evil clones. Do God, great God's mark. As the voice fell, an explosion occurred from the absolute evil clones. Countless absolute evils were blown to ashes, and not a single drop of blood was left behind. What? The explosion was so inexplicable that Maxwell did not understand what was going on. He saw with his own eyes that Wu Ming, who did nothing, was covered by the absolute evil clones. Do you know the Lune Rune? Wu Ming, who walked out from the center of the explosion unscathed, stretched out his finger and drew in the air as he spoke to Maxwell. The great god Odin sacrificed an eye in exchange for supreme wisdom. It's not that simple. Wu Ming casually tossed the rune that he had drawn, and a few more absolute evil clones that charged forward were instantly burned to ashes and disappeared with the wind. In order to prevent the blood of the absolute evil clones from producing new absolute evil clones, Wu Ming had been using the Lune Rune that could completely destroy the absolute evil clones. Maxwell, who understood what the Lune Rune was, could not help but frown. He was so angry that he was about to lose his mind, but he did not completely lose his mind. He still understood what was futile. Not only that, but Wu Ming also had the powerful power of chanting, and the Manchala square that stored many divine persona equipment. No matter how many absolute evil clones there were, they would not be able to do anything to him in a short time. Moreover, Vera might have already escaped. This guy is just trying to piss me off. At that moment, Maxwell had such a thought. To put it bluntly, Maxwell wanted to escape. Wu Ming naturally would not let Maxwell escape. I still say the same thing. As a 4-digit demon king, you are too cheap. You are not worthy of Vera at all. One of Wu Ming's taunts made Maxwell angry again. Ah, shut up. Vera is mine. My. Wu Ming could not help but laugh. As expected, Maxwell would lose his mind when it came to Vera. Wu Ming's previous taunts were all to make Maxwell gradually lose his mind and lower his IQ. After all, an opponent without reason would not escape. Moreover, an opponent without reason would not hold back their strength, and would reveal their hidden killer moves. For example, standing in the middle of the absolute evil clones army, and being able to command the absolute evil clones. Wu Ming had more or less understood Maxwell's situation. Next, it was time to use the real deal. If Maxwell reacted and allowed any of the absolute evil clones to escape to the capital of Raging Flames, it would be a big problem. Moreover, with so many absolute evil clones, they should be all of Maxwell's assets. It was just nice to get rid of them all in one go. At that moment, Wu Ming snapped his fingers. Pow! Chapter 850. Along with the almost inaudible vibrations, the entire space seemed to have changed. Maxwell felt a chill run down his spine, as if he had encountered an unprecedented crisis. What did you do? Unlike the previous angry roars, this time Maxwell questioned Wu Ming with a slightly frightened tone. Of course I'm playing the game of blessings. Wu Ming lowered his raised hand and answered in a rather pleased tone. Immediately after, Wu Ming's devilish smile was reflected in Maxwell's eyes, causing the temperature on Maxwell's back to drop by quite a bit. Do you have the authority of the organizer? It was understandable that Maxwell was shocked. Not everyone could obtain the authority of the organizer, not to mention Wu Ming, who had just joined the box court not long ago. Although Maxwell was a 4-digit demon king, he didn't have the authority of the organizer. There was no other reason. Although Maxwell had been in the box court longer than Wu Ming, he and Wu Ming were both considered newbies. However, this once again proved how cheap Maxwell, the 4-digit demon king, was. Wu Ming was different from Maxwell. As the root dragon, the box court naturally wouldn't be stingy with granting Wu Ming the authority of the organizer. This was an intangible benefit. It seems like you don't know that I have the authority of the organizer. But soon after, Wu Ming felt relieved. Ever since he used the authority of the organizer on Wu Ming, he didn't use it again. After all, Wu Ming didn't need the authority of the organizer. Over time, the authority of the organizer was basically forgotten by Wu Ming. While Wu Ming was still thinking about how to deal with Maxwell, he slowly thought of using the authority of the organizer to deal with Maxwell. In the box court world, the box court system was absolute. Even the humans in the final trial had to abide by the rules of the box court. If he had to find someone who wasn't restricted by the box court, it would definitely be Wu Ming. Of course, he had to be in his true body. Thank you for sending me these bodies of absolute evil. Judging from the number, this should be all of them. Not only will I be able to eliminate them all in one go, but I can also bury them with you. This is killing two birds with one stone. Smack! Wu Ming raised his hand and snapped his fingers again. A white contract document floated down from the sky and landed in front of Maxwell. Maxwell subconsciously caught it and began to read it. Gift game name. Challenge game contestant. Maxwell contestants winning condition. Defeat the organizer at the designated venue. Host's victory condition. The contestant cannot defeat the host within the specified time limit. Participant penalty for failure. Death oath. Respecting the above content, based on the glory, flag, and authority of the organizer, this game of blessings will be held. Seal of Originate God. This was an extremely simple bestowment competition. All one needed to do was defeat the organizer. It was as simple and crude as those demon kings who abused the organizer's authority to attack ordinary citizens. But today, the victim was a demon king with a 4-digit number. RIP! Angrily tearing the contract to shreds, Maxwell went completely mad. Ah! Hearing this heart-wrenching cry, people who didn't know would think that Maxwell had suffered a great grievance. What is it? Lord Demon King, you don't even have the courage to participate in the bestowment competition? As long as you defeat me, you can win. Wu Ming continued to mock Maxwell in a mocking tone, even though he was forced to participate in the gift match. However, defeating Wu Ming was extremely difficult. The Manchala phalanx that contained thousands of divine weapons, the divine blade of salvation, the evolved divine power obtained from killing a god, the rune script that the god Odin sacrificed one of his eyes, the martial arts that originated from the Shadow Queen Skaha, the game system magic that came from an unknown world, and the spiritual base that reached the peak of the servant. In terms of weapons, Maxwell was not as good as Wu Ming. In terms of magic, Maxwell was not as good as Wu Ming. In terms of close combat, Maxwell was not as good as Wu Ming. In terms of home field advantage, Maxwell was not as good as Wu Ming. Maxwell's bestowment could not cause any damage to Wu Ming. The only cheat like immortality and miraculous space jump also lost its effect after Maxwell was pulled into the game of blessings by Wu Ming. Although Maxwell didn't have a comprehensive understanding of Silent Wonder, he knew one thing. In a head-on battle, he absolutely couldn't win against Silent Wonder. In short, Maxwell could only die now. You want me to die? It's not that easy. Maxwell suddenly raised his head. His eyes were slightly protruding and bloodshot. Maxwell waved his hand, and the army of absolute evil avatars ran toward the direction of Blazing Flame City. You're right. Someone needs to be buried with me. People who were close to death tended to become more clear-headed. It seemed that Maxwell was like that. He actually thought of letting the army of absolute evil avatars attack Blazing Flame City. If so many absolute evil avatars attacked Blazing Flame City, Wu Ming was sure that Blazing Flame City would be destroyed. This was what Wu Ming was worried about before. But do you think I didn't think of this, Maxwell? Wu Ming crossed his arms and smiled. Other than that, he did nothing else. When the absolute evil avatars rushed to a certain place, it was as if there was an invisible wall blocking their way. The absolute evil avatars collectively stopped. Bam 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 bam. However, there were still many two-headed dragons who crashed into the wall and let out miserable shrieks. Roar roar roar. Along with the collision of the two-headed dragons, the entire space changed. Like raindrops falling into the water, the entire space of the barren land where Wu Ming, Maxwell, and the two-headed dragon army were changed completely amidst the ripples. This wasn't the barren land outside Blazing Flame City. This was clearly an endless ice field filled with icicles. The invisible wall that blocked the absolute evil avatars was a layer of ice that was more than 10 meters thick. Phew! A gust of cold wind blew and Maxwell couldn't help but shrink his body. Now he understood why he felt a chill down his spine. It wasn't because he was overly afraid. Instead, it was because the environment around him had been changed. The contract clearly states that you have to defeat the organizer at the stipulated venue. You've already arrived at the so-called stipulated venue, Wu Ming said, and a contract appeared before him. The previous contract had been torn apart by Maxwell, but that didn't affect the contents of the contract at all. Then, Wu Ming tossed the contract aside and picked up the staff of Anziergen that had appeared beside him out of nowhere. Everything just now was an illusion created by the Lune Rune. You've already arrived at this tomb long before I issued the contract. This was the fixed enchantment of the staff of Anziergen, the fifth layer of ice field in Nasalic. The staff of Anziergen was retrieved by Wu Ming from his Dragoness space after the Lune Rune's illusion was activated. The Lune Rune was inscribed on the ground by Wu Ming's mental strength, which was why Maxwell didn't see it. All right, Maxwell. Are you ready to meet your death? Chapter 851. Salamandra's headquarters, the fifth palace of the 12 palaces, the underground passage that Galji and Ling entered. The staircase leading underground extended in a spiral pattern. Because of the surrounding darkness, Galji took out the illumination gift from his gift card and walked up the stairs with Ling. After walking for a long time, the two still didn't see the bottom. We're not there yet, Your Highness. Ling held her gift card that was starting to heat up and said worriedly, Can't hold on any longer? Galji stopped and turned to look at the gift card in Ling's hand. Ling's gift card was no longer the same color as before. The entire card was red and there was a faint trace of heat. If you can't hold on any longer, then use my gift card to replace it. Although Galji's gift card contained other people's items, if he really couldn't hold on any longer, he had to use it when necessary. After all, he couldn't let that come out here. Regardless of the losses, if that really came out, he and Ling would be in great danger. It's okay, Your Highness. My gift card can still hold on for a while. Let's go quickly. Ling wiped the sweat from her forehead and smiled to show that she was fine. At that moment, Galji didn't say anything more. Right now they had to reach the bottom quickly. After walking for a while, Galji and Ling finally saw the bottom. It was an underground space. On one of the walls in the underground space, the words "Between the Stars" were engraved. Not only that, but there were also 5 sealed doors and a piece of parchment on the wall engraved with the words. As mentioned before, even humans in the final trial had to follow the rules of the box court. After absolute evil was sealed, it naturally left behind a contract document. Of course, this parchment was the contract document that sealed absolute evil, and these 5 doors were probably the entrance to unlock absolute evil's seal. However, the correct entrance could only be one of them. However, Galji and Ling had no intention of solving this gift game at all. They even stood motionless in the same place. If we had the item to unlock the seal, I'm afraid we would have to unravel the mystery of this game to unlock the seal. Galji couldn't help but sigh. However, with Belle around, the mystery of the game of blessings will naturally be solved easily. Belle, who was standing behind Galji, smiled proudly. It seemed that the young girl had unparalleled confidence in her wisdom. But shortly after, her expression changed. Your Highness, my gift card can't hold on much longer. Ling's expression changed as she said to Galji with a sad face. Galji looked at Belle's gift card. The gift card, which was originally red from the heat, had now turned black. It was an ominous shade of black. Ling, place your gift card in front of the 5 doors. Be quick, Galji ordered. Belle's gift card and the others' gift cards were all broken, so it wasn't wise to release that one here. Now he could only throw caution to the wind and place Belle's gift card together with the thing inside it. When the thing corrodes Belle's gift card, it will automatically come out. Quick, Ling, put it down and we'll leave as soon as possible. If they stayed any longer, they would probably be buried with the seal of absolute evil. Yes. Ling immediately used her gift of distance control, and the gift card in her hand appeared in front of the 5 doors. Let's go. After Galji finished speaking, Ling immediately came to Galji's side and grabbed his arm. Ling's gift was activated again, and the two instantly disappeared on the spot, and returned to the first step of the spiral staircase. The reason why they didn't use the gift card to go to the bottom was that Ling didn't know how deep the spiral staircase was and couldn't accurately control the distance. Now that they had walked through it once, Ling had an idea of the distance from the bottom to the top. Hence, Ling brought Galji to the first step. Dong dong. Galji immediately knocked on the bronze statue blocking the entrance. This was his and Elder Ji's secret signal. A few seconds later, the bronze statue was moved away and Galji and Ling immediately came out. After Galji and Belle came out, Galao immediately put the bronze statue back in place. Your Highness, how is it? Aurora, who came with Elder Gu, immediately asked. It's ready. Let's leave quickly. Galji said without hesitation. Elder Gu and Aurora nodded. Then, the four of them immediately followed the original path and left Salamandra. At the gate of Salamandra, the member of Salamandra who went to report had already returned to his post. They actually said to let them do whatever they want. Even if we are allies with no name, they can't just do whatever they want. Although he complained like this, he knew that even though Wu Ming's community was a nameless no name, he wasn't some insignificant character. Whether they were afraid of the other party, or they were allies. In short, Mandela's order was to wait and see. Anyway, this guard was not the leader of Salamandra, so he didn't have to worry about it. He just had to listen to the orders from above and watch his own gate. But right after that, he heard soft footsteps coming from behind him. He immediately turned around, but what greeted him was a fist that was not the size of a normal person. Who, before he could shout, he was immediately knocked out by the fist. The one who knocked him out was naturally Elder Gu in his human form. It's time to go, Elder Gu. Galji said behind Elder Ji's back. There was no telling when that would come out, so it was better to leave quickly. Elder Gu naturally understood this point, so he didn't kill him. He only knocked out the member of Salamandra who was guarding the door. The soft footsteps were caused by them walking too quickly. But since they were already at the gate, there was no need to hide it. Your Highness, do we still need to wait for Maxwell? Aurora suddenly asked. In my opinion, that guy probably ran away a long time ago. How could he beat that bastard? Ling pouted. They naturally knew that Maxwell went to find Wu Ming. With Maxwell leading Wu Ming, they were happy to see this, so they let Maxwell do whatever he wanted. And Ling and the others, who had seen how powerful Wu Ming was, naturally knew that Maxwell could not beat Wu Ming. That was why Ling said that Maxwell ran away a long time ago. As for being killed or captured by Wu Ming, it was not realistic. After all, Maxwell's immortality and escapability were top-notch. That's true, Your Highness. We should hurry and retreat. Elder Gu also advised. At that moment, Galji nodded and the four of them prepared to leave. But I really didn't expect you to have such high expectations for Maxwell. Chapter 852. Wu Ming's voice came from the shadows of the street in front of them, which made the four of them immediately alert. Then, Wu Ming's figure walked out of the shadows of the night, and Wu Ming appeared in front of the four of them. You still found us in the end. Galji closed his eyes slightly. Wu Ming being able to defeat Maxwell and find them in time was also within Galji's expectations, but the probability was very small. It's all thanks to Maxwell. Wu Ming smiled. If it weren't for Maxwell, he really wouldn't have known that Galji and the others would sneak into Salamandra tonight. However, Galji didn't understand Wu Ming's words. Although they weren't in the same group, Maxwell shouldn't have deliberately exposed their location. After all, this was related to the plan of the higher-ups. However, there was another possibility. For example, Maxwell had been captured by Wu Ming. Where's Maxwell? Galji asked Wu Ming. Wu Ming answered Galji straightforwardly. I caught him. Wu Ming's eyes weren't perfunctory at all, as if he was telling the truth. Seeing that Wu Ming didn't seem to be lying, Belle, Galao, and Aurora were shocked. They knew best how difficult it was to deal with Maxwell. He was born between life and death, and the strongest demon in the North District had been entangled by Maxwell for 100 years. However, Wu Ming, who had only met Maxwell a few times, had actually captured him. How could they not be shocked? However, this gave them a signal. Wu Ming's strength was probably beyond their imagination. At that moment, the three of them immediately became vigilant. Gulao's black cloak bulged slightly, as if he was about to remove his human form and turn back into a griffin. A bulge also appeared under Aurora's black cloak, which looked like a weapon. Belle grabbed Galji's hand, ready to use the gift of distance control to take him away if something went wrong. On the other hand, Galji didn't panic at all. He didn't look like someone who had been forced into a corner by Wu Ming. Anyway, we're not in cahoots with him. You've helped me by capturing him. I have no intention of helping you. Wu Ming then looked at Galji. Instead, it's you guys who sneaked into Salamandra. What are you up to? I should have told you to stop messing around with the people around me, right? The people around Wu Ming didn't just refer to no name. It could be understood that the people around Wu Ming were also included in the category of people around him. To put it simply, Wu Ming didn't want to see Galji again, at least not in this way. Galji didn't say anything and just watched Wu Ming quietly. However, Belle, Elder Ge, and Aurora, who had a tacit understanding with Galji, were ready to attack. Wu Ming didn't want to waste any more time with Galji's group and took the lead. Wu Ming didn't move at all. Instead, he relied on his mental strength to transport a large amount of Lune runes from the ground to Galji's group. There's something below. Aurora, who was a mage, was the first to discover the Lune runes underground. She yelled and immediately flew up with magic. At this moment, the explosive Lune runes underground were activated. Boom! Smoke and dust filled the entrance of Salamandra, concealing Galji's group of 4. However, this didn't affect Wu Ming, who possessed mental strength at all. He easily saw Elder Ge, who had transformed into a griffin, charging toward him. Suddenly, rows of translucent squares appeared behind Wu Ming. Mjolnir, Mjolnir. Wu Ming yelled and a short-handled hammer emerged from one of the squares. Wu Ming grasped it in his hand. Then, Wu Ming swung the short hammer heavily at Glea, who had transformed into a griffin and was charging over. In an instant, lightning erupted from the hammer like a wave, and countless thunderbolts engulfed Glea and drowned him. Glea hurriedly retreated from the range of the thunderbolts. However, his body was full of scorch marks and traces of thunderbolts that hadn't dissipated. Ugh! This caused Glea to whimper in pain, because the lightning was still taking effect in Glea's body. Clang, clang. Along with the sound of a harp, the thunderbolts in Glea's body gradually disappeared. Wu Ming turned to the source of the sound. It turned out that it was the harp that Aurora had retrieved from under the black cloak and played. Needless to say, the harp must be a special gift to be able to eliminate the thunderbolts of Thor's hammer. Mjolnir, also known as Thor's hammer, was a weapon used by Thor, the thunder god of Northern European mythology. It was said to be made of rare metals from Northern Europe, and the wood of the world tree. It could be said to be the strongest weapon in Northern European mythology. The fact that Glea could withstand the thunderbolts of Thor's hammer was enough to prove that he wasn't weak. So can you still withstand the next attack? Wu Ming yelled and threw Mjolnir back into the square behind him. Shortly after, one of the squares in the Manchala square behind Wu Ming moved again. A spear, or rather, a throwing spear, fell into Wu Ming's palm. Gungnir. Wu Ming aimed the spear at Glea and threw it. What's that name? Galji instantly guessed what the spear that Wu Ming threw was. That's right, the legendary weapon held by the Norse god Odin. It was also known as the Gungnir of the god's declaration. However, what was important wasn't who held it, but the ability of Gungnir. Gungnir didn't have any fancy attributes. It only had one characteristic, which was that it would never miss. It was extremely simple and powerful. Old Glea. Belle yelled at Glea hurriedly. I got it, Glea said, flapping his griffin wings, and hurriedly flying in another direction. However, Glea also knew that Odin's Gungnir was a divine spear that would never miss. It was impossible to dodge and would definitely hit the enemy's weapon. Therefore, no matter how Glea dodged, it would be useless unless he was hit or blocked. However, they didn't have any defensive gifts. Wu Ming had also extorted the Leo's sovereignty of the sun from Galji. But Glea, who knew this, still chose to dodge. Gungnir, who had been thrown out by Wu Ming, followed closely behind Glea, and its speed became faster and faster. In the end, Glea actually saw the opportunity and turned sideways, allowing Gungnir to pierce through his thigh. Got to say, this was indeed a way to deal with the Gungnir. Glea's thigh was only pierced, and his wings and forelimbs were fine, so it didn't affect his battle capabilities much. The Gungnir that hit Glea automatically flew back to Wuming's hand. Wuming tossed it casually into the Manchala square. I don't want to continue playing with you guys. Since the other party didn't reveal any more trump cards, there was no need to do so. Chapter 853. As Wuming spoke, a large number of grids appeared in the Manchala formation behind him. Countless weapons automatically appeared and aimed at Galgi and the others. With that, countless high-grade armaments shot towards Galgi, Belle, and Aurora like bullets from a machine gun. Belle. Aurora, who was flying in the air, shouted. She played her harp and opened an extremely weak barrier a few meters in front of her. Her purpose was naturally to cover Belle and take Galgi away. As long as Galgi and Belle left, she, who was flying in the sky, would be able to escape easily. As for Galgi, he had already flown far away, so everyone would be able to escape successfully. I got it. Belle nodded fiercely and immediately activated her ability. However, she and Galgi remained where they were. What's going on? Belle was rather flustered and at a loss. On the other hand, Galgi saw that the surrounding exploded ground was filled with Lune runes again. He didn't know if it came with the explosion runes, or if it was sent by Wuming when he and Wuming were fighting just now. Anyway, it was these runes that limited Belle's range of control. Galgi used all his strength to kick the ground. A large number of Lune runes lost their light. It seemed that they had been destroyed and lost their effectiveness. However, countless Lune runes appeared immediately after, like an endless supply of leaks. What? It seemed that Wuming had set up a large number of these Lune runes to trap them. As expected, someone who was able to capture Maxwell after just a few meetings, how could he not have prepared a method to counter Belle's gift? However, there was no time for Belle and Galgi to panic and think because Aurora's defensive barrier was extremely weak and was instantly broken by countless God's Park weapons. This was Wuming's strength. They had finally witnessed it today. For a moment, the few of them who couldn't leave and had no defensive means were at their wits' end. Even so, Belle and Aurora instantly appeared in front of Galgi and protected him behind them. Galgi was shocked. A friend in need was a friend indeed. Under such circumstances, the fact that the two of them could still protect Galgi without any hesitation meant that their relationship with Galgi was no longer as simple as a master-servant relationship. Only close companions could describe the two of them as such. However, it wasn't just Belle and Aurora. Glea was the same. Glea, who had flown far away because of Gungnir's pursuit, suddenly rushed back at an extremely fast speed. Roar! Along with a dragon's roar, Glea's griffin body shone brightly. His entire body began to expand and transform. In the end, Glea turned into a giant dragon and stood in front of Galgi and the others, taking on Wuming's weapon barrage. Elder Gu. As a young girl, Belle looked at Glea, who had blocked the damage for them with heartache. Glea was the one who had blocked the Lune rune explosion for them. Then, Belle calmed down and looked at Galgi. Your Highness, what should we do now? Glea used his life to create an opportunity for them, so Galgi had to give instructions on what to do. No matter if it was to attack or retreat, Galgi had to make the decision. They were blocked by Wuming as soon as they stepped out of Salamandra. Belle's gift wasn't effective at the moment, Aurora wasn't of much use, and they couldn't defeat Galgi in a head-on battle. Glea was also enduring the pain of taking on the weapon barrage for the three of them. Given the current situation, it seemed like retreating to the base of Salamandra for the time being was the wisest choice. However, such a huge commotion at the entrance of Salamandra naturally attracted the attention of the insiders. As a mage, Aurora could clearly sense that there were already many people rushing over here. Besides, if they hid inside Salamandra, they would eventually be discovered, especially when Wuming was still here. Besides, they couldn't give up on Glea. Get ready, I'm going to forcibly release another cosmology. Galgi's eyes suddenly became cold. The so-called another cosmology was another universe, and it was also a powerful force that Wuming didn't know about in the Box Garden world. It could be understood as a gift that could infinitely magnify one's own universe to interfere with the outside world. This explanation seemed similar to the inherent enchantment that materialized the mind of a magician, but at the end of the day, another cosmology was many times more powerful than the inherent enchantment. This was because the simulation of another cosmology was infinitely magnifying the cosmology one belonged to. This was not something that a mere magician's spiritual landscape could compare to. Moreover, the holder of another cosmology was basically the center of every group of gods, or rather, those who possessed another cosmology often had the ability to become the center of a group of gods. Therefore, it was not an exaggeration to say that another cosmology was one of the most powerful forces in the box garden world. But, Your Highness, Ling couldn't help but worry. As one of the strongest forces in the box garden, each another cosmology had its own restrictions and conditions. In order to use another cosmology, the restrictions had to be lifted or the conditions had to be met. And Galji's another cosmology required him to hold the sovereignty of the sun in order to activate it. If it was forcibly activated, failure was considered good, but serious injury or even death was very likely. However, their only two sovereignty of the sun, Leo's and Ophiuchus's, had been threatened by Wuming. In the current situation, it was extremely difficult for Galji to activate another cosmology. However, looking at Glea, who was unconscious and was only instinctively protecting them, Galji couldn't help but clench his fists. Since they had been forced to this extent, Galji would feel bad if he didn't teach Wuming a lesson. His another cosmology was a powerful trump card that could even kill the Demon King in one blow. Even Maxwell, who had an extremely powerful immortality, was no exception. Wuming was just a mere spirit. No matter how strong he was, it was impossible for him to withstand the damage caused by the another cosmology if he was caught off guard. If he was successfully launched and hit, he would die without a doubt. It could be regarded as relieving his worries. Anyway, that had been placed at the entrance of the seal of absolute evil. As long as the time was up, that would erode the seal of absolute evil, and absolute evil would break out of the seal. First, they had to get through the difficulties in front of them. Then, they could fish in troubled waters and escape from here. As for using the Pandora's box that Maxwell carried to retrieve that, what a joke. Galji and the others were preparing to take advantage of the chaos after unlocking the seal of absolute evil to eliminate Maxwell, who was sent to monitor them, and escape from the control of the higher-ups. Therefore, at present, as long as they released another cosmology, eliminated Wuming in one fell swoop, found Maxwell who was captured by Wuming, and eliminated him, they would be completely free. Do you dare to bet? Galji suddenly asked. Your Highness, no matter what, I will be by your side. Ling looked at Galji with an extremely determined gaze. Me too, Your Highness. Aurora echoed. Galji smiled. Then Galji immediately gave orders. Aurora, when I say start later, move Gulao away. Ling, please help me block the Godhead equipment that might break through the moment Gulao is moved away. Yes, Your Highness. Ling and Aurora responded in unison. Victory or defeat depended on this. Chapter 854. Wuming, who was continuously attacking Galji and the others through the Manchala Phalanx's weapon salvo, intentionally lowered the level of the weapon he released when he saw Glea blocking in front of Galji and the others. After all, Wuming didn't want to kill anyone in the first place. The weapon salvo he fired at Galji and the others was just for show. At most, it would only injure them severely, but it was impossible to kill them. But who would have thought that Glea would suddenly rush in front of Galji and the others? However, even if he intentionally lowered the level of the weapon he released, it was not something Glea's body could withstand. Just as Wuming was about to stop the projection of the Manchala Phalanx, Glea's entire dragon body seemed to be pulled by an external force and moved away. Then a ray of light charged at Wuming. Wuming subconsciously threw defensive weapons from the Manchala Phalanx, but the ray of light instantly passed through these defensive weapons and arrived in front of Wuming. Not only was Wuming surprised that the ray of light penetrated the defensive weapons, but he was also surprised by the power contained in the ray of light. It was a power he had never seen before, as if it was the power of a universe. I didn't expect Galji to have such a trump card. After Wuming finished speaking, His entire body was covered by the ray of light, and then he disappeared. Your Highness. We did it. Belle, who had blocked a few weapons for Galgi, stood in front of Galgi and looked excitedly at Wu Ming's disappearance behind the fallen shield. Is that so? Galgi forced a smile and knelt on the ground with a thud. He made the right bet. Although it didn't seem to be very powerful, the simulated cosmology was successfully released. However, the price of forcibly releasing the simulated cosmology was not small. Your Highness. Belle hurriedly supported Galgi with a worried expression. Quick, Belle. You and Aurora go check on old Gu first. Galgi knew that he wouldn't die for a while, but Glea looked like he was about to die. Glea had already reverted from his dragon form to his griffin form. His wings and back were badly mutilated, and the griffin had fallen into a coma. Don't worry, Your Highness. I've already given Glea a simple treatment. The most important thing now is to leave this place. Aurora used magic to carry Glea and landed beside Galgi. Galgi nodded and stood up with Belle's help. That's good. Let's leave quickly. And at this moment, where Wu Ming had disappeared, a sacred sword filled with a powerful and ancient aura appeared. If I remember correctly, this should be a weapon called the Divine Blade of Salvation, right? Ling pondered. Then she smiled. Looks like Your Highness killed the opponent and the gift automatically dropped. It seemed like an extremely unreliable way to kill monsters and steal treasures, but it was very possible in the box court world. After all, gifts were different from individuals. Some special gifts would automatically drop after the death of the original owner. It seemed like this was the case with the Divine Blade of Salvation. Your Highness, I'll go and get that sword. Ling entrusted Galgi to Aurora and ran in the direction of the Divine Blade of Salvation. Wait, Ling. Galgi subconsciously felt a trace of uneasiness and wanted Ling to come back. After all, there was another possibility for the gift to drop apart from killing someone. For example, the original owner of the gift was not dead. Looks like that universe-like power is your trump card, Galgi. Wu Ming's voice entered Galgi's ears. In an instant, a black and purple teleportation door appeared. Wu Ming walked out from it and appeared beside the Divine Blade of Salvation. He held the Divine Blade of Salvation in his hand. Huh. Ling couldn't help but stop and look at Wu Ming blankly. Wasn't he killed by His Highness's another cosmology? Ling. Come back. Galgi snarled. Ling reacted instantly to Galgi's roar, but the runes on the ground were still in effect. These runes weren't powerful Lune runes. Instead, they were runes that limited distances. They were often used around people who lived in seclusion to prevent outsiders from entering, and could only wander within a certain range. This was why Ling's gift of controlling distances was ineffective. If one moved within a set distance of a certain range, it might still be effective, but if one moved beyond this range, it was equivalent to being ineffective. This was why Ling's gift was as though ineffective. At that moment, Ling had no choice but to turn around and run toward Galgi. But how could Wu Ming let her go? Along with the sound of chains, Ling felt a heavy blow to the back of her head. In an instant, she felt as though someone had struck her from behind with a stick, and she gradually lost consciousness. Then countless silver-whitish chains like giant pythons bound Ling tightly. Even her nose and eyes were completely covered, making her look like a mummy. Then, Ling snapped her fingers and a purplish-black ripple appeared beneath her feet. She and the pseudo-heaven lock fell into it together. Ling. Galgi took a step forward agitatedly, but due to his injuries, he couldn't help but kneel on the ground. Fortunately, Aurora was there to support him. Don't worry, I'm not that cruel to kill her. I only captured her. Wu Ming approached Galgi step by step with the Blade of Salvation in his hand. Don't come over. Aurora raised her courage and roared at Wu Ming with her harp. However, this didn't have any effect on Wu Ming's advance. How about another deal? Wu Ming ignored Aurora and turned to Galgi. Tell me your purpose in entering Salamandra, and the sequence of events. Don't even think about it. Aurora wanted to attack again, but Galgi grabbed her arm. Galgi silently shook his head, indicating that Aurora shouldn't make any unnecessary resistance. Simply put, she should endure, and not get hurt for no reason. At this time, the last salamander troops to arrive surrounded Galgi, Wu Ming and the others. "Stop!" Mandela shouted in high spirits. Then he was glared at by Wu Ming. However, Mandela had to endure. "Take these people down." Mandela pointed at Galgi and the others. Then, the members of Salamandra stepped forward and prepared to take Galgi and the others into custody. At this time, there was a violent tremor inside Salamandra. Rumble. The earth shook. Chapter 855. Galgi looked at the epicenter and found that it was the fifth palace. That direction. Not good. Mandela's expression suddenly changed as he looked in the same direction. "Quick, inform everyone to evacuate the residents of Blazing Flame City. Get everyone to leave Blazing Flame City immediately. Move quickly." Mandela calmly gave the order. After that, the troops of Salamandra ignored Galgi and Wu Ming and began to carry out Mandela's orders. After that, Mandela looked deeply at Wu Ming, Galgi and the others, and then rushed into Salamandra. "As you can see, the seal of absolute evil has been broken." Seeing that the outsiders had left, Galgi spoke. Galgi noticed that Wu Ming's expression had also changed, but Wu Ming's expression was neither fear nor shock, but joy and melancholy. "I think I know how you broke the seal of absolute evil, Galgi." This was because Wu Ming felt the aura of his main body. It seemed that his main body was in Salamandra, which was why Wu Ming was so happy. Only Wu Ming's main body, the root dragon, was immune to the rules of the box court, and could break the seal of absolute evil without the tools to break the seal. "Let's change the deal. Tell me all the information about absolute evil." Since the seal had been broken, it was time to collect information to deal with absolute evil. Wu Ming snapped his fingers. Pa! Along the way, a white contract document appeared in Galgi's hand. Organizer Authority. Seeing this contract document, Galgi was shocked. He now knew why Wu Ming could capture Maxwell. It was because of the Organizer Authority. Then, Wu Ming took out the staff of Ains Ergong and tapped it lightly on the ground. Galgi, Aurora, and Glea disappeared on the spot. They were forcibly sent to their own space by Wu Ming. Then, Wu Ming chanted the words of the spirit. "My contract, my kin, I am the place where the tributaries converge. Bind with me, heed my call, obey my command, appear." Then a figure appeared behind Wu Ming. It was Wu Ming's eighth incarnation, the kin. The Wu Ming that Galgi had destroyed was actually one of Wu Ming's kin clones. Only the blade of salvation that the clone at that time was given by the main body. Then, Wu Ming handed the staff of Ains Ergong to the clone. The clone nodded and tapped the ground with the tip of the staff. The clone also disappeared. He went to the intrinsic barrier to make a deal with Galgi and the others, or rather, to act as the host of the game of gifts. However, the gift competition that Wu Ming forced Galgi and the others to participate in was different from the one that he forced Maxwell to participate in. This time, Wu Ming prepared the gift competition for Galgi, and the others only to fish for information. Wu Ming even cautiously divided the three of them into different spaces. Although it was a temporary imprisonment, Wu Ming was not prepared to let Galgi and the others go so easily this time. Firstly, the disaster they caused this time was quite serious. Secondly, Galgi unlocked the seal of absolute evil. Not only did he release Wu Ming's main body, but he also released the remaining black mud that was attached to Wu Ming's main body. Back then, the black mud exploded deep into Wu Ming's body. In such a short time, it was impossible to clean up the black mud. Even if the inside of his body was cleaned up, it was inevitable that there would be black mud outside of his body. Perhaps they had used the corrosive power of the black mud to erode the seal of absolute evil. In the box, one had to abide by the rules of the box, but Wu Ming was an exception. However, Wu Ming would not take the initiative to break or challenge the rules of the box. Moreover, Wu Ming would never have thought that the other party would use the black mud left on his main body as the key to unlocking the seal of absolute evil. The black mud and Wu Ming were of the same origin. If Wu Ming was not affected by the box system, then the black mud was also not affected by the black mud. However, this was not a big deal. If absolute evil came into contact with the black mud, it would be very troublesome. This was the reason why Wu Ming was depressed. Without staying any longer, Wuming immediately took action and flew toward the place filled with the aura of his main body. Salamandra Fifth Palace, inside the sealed passage of absolute evil. Countless black mud rippled against the walls like ocean waves, causing the ground to tremble continuously. A 3-meter-tall black monster with 3 heads was crawling in the black mud, as if it was swimming in a comfortable ocean. Every time the monster swayed, black mud would flow out from under the monster's body and spread to the surroundings. Gradually, the entire sealed passage was submerged in black mud. But the monster did not feel any discomfort. It continued to swim in the Black Sea as if it did not want to care about anything on the ground. It was as if it just wanted to stay here. However, excessive black mud poured into the ground through the gaps of the bronze statue and began to cover everything on the ground. Anything that came into contact with the black mud, whether it was a person or an object, all burned up. The entire salamandra fell into a sea of fire. What is this? Help! However, before these people who were infected by the black mud could shout, the flames burned them to ashes. Get away from the black mud. Mandela, who was a step late, saw the situation and immediately began to order the people of Salamandra. Don't take anything with you. Everyone immediately evacuate from Salamandra and cover the evacuation of the residents of Flame Capital. Mandela once again ordered the internal members of Salamandra. At the rate the black mud was spreading, it would not be long before the entire Salamandra, or even the entire Flame Capital, would be corroded. At that moment, the members of Salamandra immediately acted as if they could not wait to leave this place immediately. Looking at Salamandra that was almost empty and had fallen into a sea of fire, Mandela could not help but sigh. There will be a day when Salamandra's headquarters will be covered in a sea of fire. After that, Mandela continued to walk inside. Sir Mandela? Mandela's confidants were puzzled by Mandela's behavior. If he continued to go deeper, he was afraid that he would not be able to come out later. The leader is still inside. I will go find her. Mandela said without turning his head. We will go together, Sir Mandela. Yes, Sir Mandela. Let's go together. Mandela's confidants immediately followed Mandela's footsteps. However, Mandela was furious. What are you doing? Can't you see that everyone who is touched by the black mud is burning? Retreat. Even the members of Salamandra who had the bloodline of the fire dragon could not hold on for more than a second. This showed how powerful the black mud was. However, one of Mandela's confidants immediately answered. But Sir Mandela, we cannot abandon you. Nor can we abandon Lady Shadora. The others did not speak, but their eyes were extremely serious. They looked like they would not leave no matter what Mandela said. It could only be said that they were indeed members of Salamandra who had the bloodline of the fire dragon. Their stubbornness was exactly the same as Mandela, who also had the bloodline of the fire dragon. At this moment Wuming flew in. Leave Shadora to me. Hurry up and evacuate the residents of Flame Capital. Don't let the black mud touch them. Otherwise it will be over. As Wuming spoke, he flew in from the back. He did not stop all the way and flew directly into the interior. Obviously, he did not give Mandela and the others a chance to choose. Then I will leave Shadora to you. Mandela was also a reasonable person. Since Wuming wanted to go in, he would be a burden if he followed him in. Everyone, follow me to evacuate the residents of Flame Capital. With that, Mandela left with his confidants. Wu Ming, on the other hand, went deep inside Salamandra. Looking at the black mud that kept spreading in front of him, what Wu Ming was worried about still happened. Chapter 856. If the black root mud was taken out on its own, it wouldn't cause much damage. It only had a special effect on Wu Ming. At most, it could destroy the seal of absolute evil like Galgi and the others. That was because the black root mud was attached to Wu Ming's body. If it was removed from Wu Ming's body, even if it was placed on the seal of absolute evil, it wouldn't cause any damage to the seal of absolute evil. The black root mud was neither good nor evil. It only targeted Wu Ming. However, if it was held by someone with evil intentions, it would completely become evil. Just like when Darius held the black root mud became an evil thing. It could erode servants, but other than that, It didn't have much effect on the ground, flowers, and trees. If Gidia held the black root mud, it would become a good thing because he only wanted to use the black root mud to achieve his own goals. Although it was evil in the eyes of humans, the black root mud was only used to deal with Wuming. There were no other changes. The black root mud was even simpler. It was neither good nor evil. It simply gave the black root mud to the Star Cup's consciousness. It didn't have much use at all, and it was easily destroyed by Wuming. Looking at the current situation, it was very likely that absolute evil had touched the black root mud, and used the black root mud as its power to fuse with it. The amount of black root mud continued to increase, and it caught fire when it came into contact with people. It was likely that absolute evil's ability extended after fusing with the black root mud. If it's absolute evil that fused with the black root mud, I'm afraid it will come to me next. Wuming said to himself. Although he was talking to himself, it was reasonable. The black root mud and Wuming were natural enemies. After being held by others, the other party would have a strong hostility toward Wuming. Wuming had experienced this many times. Darius, the consciousness of the Star Cup, and Gidia were both good, evil, and neutral, but they all had one thing in common, which was that they were inexplicably hostile toward Wuming. As such, absolute evil, who had absorbed the black origin soil, was probably also hostile toward Wuming. However, even if he was attacked by absolute evil, Wuming wouldn't run away from it. In terms of emotions, absolute evil was an existence that could endanger Quan Ting. Since Wuming had encountered it, he would deal with it. Logically speaking, absolute evil had the black origin soil on him, and his main body was probably with absolute evil. Even if absolute evil didn't find trouble with Wuming, Wuming would find trouble with absolute evil. Let's find Shadora first. Wuming activated his psychic power to search for Shadora. It could only be said that Wuming was very lucky to find Shadora's location in an instant. At this moment, Wuming sensed that Shadora was carrying a little girl from Salamandra. They were flying in a room filled with black mud and fire. The entire room was burning and couldn't come out. Shadora! Wuming shouted as he flew in Shadora's direction. Lord Villo! Shadora was overjoyed when she heard Wuming's voice, as if she had escaped. However, she immediately shouted at Wuming. Lord Wuming, be careful! Lord Varen, be careful of these flames. The flames produced by the black mud have the same properties as the black mud. Shadora knew that not long ago, one of her companions rushed into the flames to save someone because he had the fire dragon bloodline. In the end, not only did he not save the person, but he also died. Not even a trace of him was left. However, Wuming wasn't afraid of this. Or rather, only Wuming wasn't afraid of this. Whoosh! Wuming rushed into the sea of fire that surrounded Shadora and flew to her side. Lord Villo, are you alright? Shadora was startled. The black origin soil was indeed Wuming's natural enemy, but at the same time, Wuming was also the natural enemy of the black origin soil. Although the black origin soil countered Wuming and could deal a lot of damage to Wuming, it was the same. When the black origin soil was used by an outsider, Wuming was the only one who wasn't restricted. In other words, Wuming who could produce origin power had a resistance to the black origin soil. Don't worry about that for now. Leave with this child first, Wuming said and opened a portal. Lord Villo, please leave with us. This is the last child left in Salamandra. It was because of Shadora's continuous rescue that she couldn't escape in time. However, it was also thanks to Shadora that apart from Shadora and the little girl in her arms, there were no other living members in Salamandra. No, I still have to deal with the enemy this time. You guys leave first. Wuming clearly sensed a hostile aura approaching quickly from underground. However, in Shadora's opinion, Wuming chose to stay behind alone in order to cover the retreat of the people from the capital of glowing flames. Lord Villo, the seal of absolute evil under Salamandra should have been broken. However, after analyzing the previous records, the black origin soil doesn't seem to be absolute evil's ability at all. Please be careful. Shadora kindly provided Wuming with information. I understand. You guys should leave first. Wuming pointed at the portal again and signaled Shadora to leave quickly. Of course, he knew what was going on. After all, they were of the same origin. Yes. Yes, okay. Lord Villo, I wish you victory, Shadora said and jumped into the portal. After confirming that Shadora and the little girl in her arms reached a safe location, Wuming closed the portal. Then it's time to get down to business, Wuming said and raised the divine blade of salvation in his hand high up. Then Wuming stopped moving. Then a Lune rune appeared in front of Wuming out of thin air. He touched the Lune with his spirit power, and a piece of information was transmitted into Wuming's mind. Information about absolute evil. However, before Wuming could think about it, the black mire below suddenly exploded. Wuming subconsciously slashed at the black mire below him. In an instant, the lightning of salvation that had been brewing on the divine blade of salvation suddenly exploded and hit a three-headed monster that had just jumped out of the ground. Roar! The monster let out an angry roar. It seemed that it was hurt by Wuming's attack. It really merged. The monster seemed to have been corroded by the black mire and lost its mind. Although the monster was covered in black mire, Wuming could vaguely see that its head was that of a dragon's. The information just now told Wuming about absolute evil, including what its true form was. The true form of absolute evil was not a special existence. It was just an evil god that stood at the peak of evil in the fire worship sect. Three-headed demon dragon, Azidakaha. Wuming slowly said the monster's name. The monster, or Azidakaha, responded to Wuming but with an attack. Roar! The three-headed demon dragon roared and countless black mire gushed towards Wuming like pillars of magma. Boom! The house that Wuming was in, Salamandra, exploded. Wuming flew into the sky through the hole and looked down at Azidakaha with the divine blade of salvation raised high. Divine blade of salvation, release your brilliance. Chapter 857. Along with Wu Ming's words, the tip of the blade of salvation began to gather flames, and the flames slowly grew bigger. In the end, it turned into a sun, instantly illuminating the capital of glorious flames, and even the entire outer gate of the 54545 division. Although the entire burning fiery capital was also filled with flames at night, at this moment, the light of the flames could only serve as a foil to the sun, produced by the holy sword that could even split a star. The people who were retreating from raging flame capital couldn't help but slow down their footsteps when they saw the scene. However, Mandela frowned. This would greatly slow down their retreat, which was quite disadvantageous. Everyone, Lord Villo Silenseed, who defeated the Demon King who attacked during the Fire Dragon birth ceremony, is a good friend of Lord White Yiksha, and has strength no weaker than Lord White Yiksha, is fighting against the enemy who attacked us. We must seize the opportunity to retreat and not drag Lord Villo down. At that moment, Shadora, who appeared out of nowhere, shouted. When everyone heard this, it was as if they were awakened. They all sped up their retreat. After all, Wuming was covering for them. If they continued to stand there and watch, it would really be inexcusable. Although Shadora's voice could not reach the entire retreating team, many people who had begun to speed up their retreat would repeat Shadora's words when they saw someone slowing down. In this way, the news that the hero of no name was covering for their retreat spread wider and wider. More and more people sped up their retreat. In the end, before the black mud infected the entire fiery capital, everyone retreated. It could be said that Shadora's urging words had indirectly helped Wuming and No Name gain a wave of popularity. This made Mandela, who had finally found Shadora, feel rather helpless. Because this was completely using Salamandra as a stepping stone to help Wuming and No Name advertise. The people who covered the retreat of the residents of Fiery Capital were not the local Salamandra people, but the 7-digit number of No Name people from the outer gate. Although the enemy was too strong, this also reflected Wuming's strength. Simply put, Salamandra was at a disadvantage no matter what. Although Mandela did not fully understand the situation, in his opinion, absolute evil's release definitely had something to do with Wuming. The group of suspicious people at the entrance had obviously come from Salamandra. Since Wuming was able to stop the group of suspicious people at the entrance of Salamandra, if Wuming said that he was not aware of the situation, Mandela would not believe him at all. If Wuming had told Salamandra earlier, things would not have turned out this way. However, back then, Mandela did not tell Wu Ming what was sealed in Salamandra. It was his own doing. In short, although Mandela had some complaints about Wu Ming, he could only grit his teeth and swallow it. Moreover, Absolute Evil's seal had been unlocked and there were new changes. At present, he could only ask Wu Ming to temporarily stall Absolute Evil. However, if Wu Ming knew that Shadora was helping him advertise, he would not know whether to laugh or cry. Wu Ming did not know what Az-Dakaha was like in the past, but after fusing with the Black Mud, Az-Dakaha was originally living well in the source of the Black Mire underground. If Wu Ming had not come, Az-Dakaha would not have come out for a while. If he had to say something, it was Wu Ming who had prompted Az-Dakaha to come out of the underground ahead of time. Wu Ming was very clear about this. Therefore, if Wu Ming knew that Shadora had helped him and his community gain a wave of fame, he would probably be embarrassed for a while. However, Wu Ming was not likely to think about these things now. After all, the enemy was right in front of them. Wu Ming infused the countless magical powers in his body into the divine blade of salvation. The entire sun at the tip of the sword underwent an indescribable change. Of course, this was only in the eyes of outsiders. In the eyes of Wu Ming and Az-Dakaha, this sun was filled with lethality. It was especially so for Az-Dakaha. At this moment, he felt a threat to his life. Roar! The black monster spread its black dragon wings and scattered a large amount of black mud in an attempt to rush up to Wu Ming and gain the upper hand by striking first. However, Wu Ming naturally wouldn't give Az-Dakaha this opportunity. His arm that was holding the divine blade of salvation swung down abruptly, and the sun, at the tip of the sword, struck straight at Az-Dakaha. In an instant, the two of them collided. Scorching flames and incomparably dazzling white light shrouded everyone's eyes. At this moment, Golden Flame City was brighter than during the day. Shortly after, the aftermath of the explosion erupted in the sky and swept in all directions. The scale of the heat wave was so huge that everyone who had retreated from Golden Flame City couldn't help but extend their arms to support their bodies to resist the heat wave. It's really like the sun. Mandela poked his head out. Although the sun in the sky had disappeared, the aftermath of the explosion was still emitting light and extreme heat. Golden Flame City was still as bright as day. Besides, Mandela was filled with all sorts of emotions after witnessing Wu Ming's strength once again. Wu Ming was still in existence that no one dared to look up to. However, unlike Mandela, the others were more concerned about whether the monster had been defeated by Wu Ming. Has it been defeated? It was unknown who said this. At this moment, before the aftermath of the explosion in the sky dissipated, a black figure fell from the sky. Everyone focused their gaze and realized that it was the black monster. The monster was defeated by the hero. However, before everyone could rejoice, they realized that the black mire on the ground had begun to extend toward the sky as if it was going to catch the monster. In fact, that was indeed the case. The black monster was caught by the high platform made of black mire. The monster stood firm and looked at the sky again, as if provoking the hero who had just shot it down. This was also a signal that the monster had not been defeated by the hero. It had only been shot down, and the danger was still there. Cover the evacuation of the residents immediately. Mandela, who saw this scene, immediately ordered the members of Salamandra. Mandela thought to himself, as expected, it's impossible for the opponent to be defeated by a non-human existence in the final trial. Golden Flame City was no longer safe, and the entire outer gate of 54,545 was no longer safe either. They had to evacuate from this outer gate as soon as possible. Yes. Some of the members of Salamandra seemed to have yet to react to the series of events just now. They were stunned for a while before agreeing. After Mandela's reminder, all the residents of Golden Flame City hurriedly took action. They were not fools. It was obvious that the monster could not be killed in a short time. Moreover, the black mire was still spreading, so they had to retreat to a safer place. Fortunately, because they had just experienced the Demon King's attack during the day, not all the residents of Golden Flame City returned to Golden Flame City. In addition, the people of Box Ting were used to various disasters, so the following retreat was more orderly. If it were ordinary people in the outside world, the fire caused by the black mire would have burned everyone to ashes. Wuming, who was flying high in the sky, looked at the people around Golden Flame City gradually dispersing. He was inexplicably relieved. Chapter 858. Wuming could not understand what was going on in the minds of the residents of the box. In the face of such a disaster, they just stood around and watched? Why were they so calm? But at least they retreated in the end. With that in mind, Wuming looked down at Aziz Dakaha, who was staring at him like an abyss. In this way, Wuming could deal with this guy with peace of mind. According to the information provided by Galji, Aziz Dakaha, the absolute evil, was originally an evil god at the peak of evil in the Persian Zoroastrianism mythology. For some reason, he became the absolute evil in one of the final trials of humans in the box. Wuming was not afraid of Aziz Dakaha. After all, he was just an evil god. Wuming had never been afraid of gods. The half-Godslayer authority he obtained in the Godslayer world constantly reminded Wuming that Aziz was a god that needed to be killed. The reason why it was half-Godslayer was because Wuming's previous deeds had been completed in the Godslayer world, and he had obtained the half-Godslayer qualification. Wuming had left his inheritance in Uruk, and he had killed the last king, Rama, and replaced him. It could be said that Wuming was a contradictory existence that was both a Godslayer and a god. However, Aziz Dakaha was not just an evil god in the Zoroastrianism. In this box, he had become one of the final trials of humans. And in the final trial of humans, he had to be defeated, surpassed by humans. This was why Mandela wanted Wuming to temporarily stall Aziz Dakaha instead of defeating him. But that attack just now should have killed Aziz Dakaha, right? Yes, Wuming's blow just now did hit Aziz Dakaha, and Aziz Dakaha's breath at that time was also in a state of death. The Blade of Salvation was a so-called planet-destroying weapon. Even if Aziz Dakaha was an evil god, he would not be able to withstand the powerful blow of the Blade of Salvation in a head-on clash. That was why Wuming said that he had killed Aziz Dakaha. However, Wuming had subconsciously forgotten that this was the Box Garden world. The fire worship sect's three-headed demonic dragon, Aziz Dakaha, had indeed died. However, humans would never be killed by non-human beings in the final trial. Therefore, Quan Ting's system allowed Aziz Dakaha to come back to life. "You can't kill me, my old enemy." At this moment, Aziz Dakaha spoke, but for some reason, all three of his heads spoke at the same time, speaking with emphasis to Wuming. "You still have self-awareness." Wuming was shocked. After all, no matter who it was, they would think that the three-headed monster that was covered in black mud, and whose original appearance could not be seen clearly, and could only roar furiously, had lost its mind. "I am evil to begin with. How can I be controlled by this filth?" Aziz Dakaha's three heads replied together in a mocking tone to Wuming. When the black mud came into contact with Aziz Dakaha, the black mud had already become evil filth, under Aziz Dakaha's evil nature. Therefore, it was not wrong for Aziz Dakaha to call the black mud filth. Moreover, a monster should maintain the appearance of a monster. Have you ever seen a monster talk to another person? It was still a mocking tone, but it also explained why Aziz Dakaha had not spoken before. Aziz Dakaha had always followed the rules of Quan Ting. He was a monster that gave humans the final trial. How could a monster talk to a human? "You keep saying that you are a monster, but you talk to me. Don't you find that very contradictory?" Wuming asked in return. "But you are also not a human, my kind." "Ha ha ha." The three-headed dragon laughed loudly. The laughter of the three heads was indeed very penetrating. Even the retreating troops outside the city could hear the evil laughter. Aziz Dakaha was not wrong. He had already fused with the black mud, and could be considered half of Wuming's kind. However, this did not mean that Wuming would reconcile with Aziz Dakaha. "I do hope that you, the so-called one of my kind, can obediently return to your own seal." "That's impossible. My kind." Aziz Dakaha's three heads stared at Wuming. "If I don't kill you, I won't be able to take it." For example, humans had to eat and drink. As an existence that had fused with the black mud, Aziz Dakaha was hostile to Wuming due to the black mud. This caused Aziz Dakaha to half-willingly choose to eliminate Wuming. "What's more, I still have the responsibility of giving the humans the final trial. If I don't destroy the humans, I will also feel terrible. Ha ha ha. Azidakaha's words were as casual as if he was talking about eating and drinking. Wuming could not understand the meaning behind Azidakaha's words. Then, Wuming pointed the divine blade of salvation at Azidakaha. Then there is nothing to talk about between us. I will destroy you, just like those guys before. You will not be able to do it. If you want to know why, it is because... Azidakaha lowered his head, then suddenly raised it. I will destroy you here and now. After saying that, countless black mud turned into giant pillar-like tentacles that rushed into the sky like poisonous snakes that were about to prey on birds. Then you can try, Wuming said as he charged at Azidakaha. While dodging the tentacles, Wuming thought of a way to deal with Azidakaha. Azidakaha had just admitted that Wuming had indeed killed him, but there was no doubt that he had immediately revived. According to the information provided by Galji, according to the rules of the box court, in order to kill absolute evil, one had to destroy the other party's head, shoulders, and heart. It was said that the head and shoulders had been permanently damaged, so all one had to do was destroy absolute evil's heart. However, this method would not work on Wuming. It would be fine if it was just absolute evil, but the problem was that the other party had already fused with the black mud. The permanent damage to the head and shoulders could not be seen at all. Moreover, who knew if Azidakaha's original weakness had changed after fusing with the black mud? Even if it was still his weakness, Wuming did not think that absolute evil would die just because his head, shoulders, and heart were destroyed. Absolute evil's revival was a good example. Therefore, according to the rules of the box court world, I have to solve the human's final trial, absolute evil gift game to stop Azidakaha from reviving. Chapter 859. Wuming had his reasons for thinking this way. As the human's final trial, there must be a setting where only a human can completely kill the other party. In order to prevent Azidakaha from reviving, one must solve the riddle of the human's final trial, absolute evil. In the end, all the conditions were met, and one must possess enough strength to kill Azidakaha. Wuming's personal guess was that only by meeting all three of these conditions could absolute evil Azidakaha be completely killed. Wuming definitely had the strength. As for the wisdom to solve the bestowment game, Wuming believed that he could solve the riddle of absolute evil if given some time. However, he could not achieve the first condition of being a human no matter what. Even if his soul was extremely close to that of a human, and he had a human name, Wuming was still an inhuman existence. He was the root dragon. Therefore, Wuming could not kill absolute evil by normal means. The reason why it was normal was because of the restrictions brought about by the root dragon's exempt box system. Although Wuming could participate in the bestowment game, the punishment for failing the bestowment game would not take effect on Wuming. Wuming, who had the identity of the root dragon, did not need to comply with these three conditions from the beginning. He could rely on his own strength to kill Azidakaha. However, Azidakaha had the root black mud. The root black mud might have brought unexpected benefits to Azidakaha. For example, it made Wuming unclear of Azidakaha's current abilities, intelligence, and weaknesses. However, as Wuming was the nemesis of the root black mud, the root black mud could be said to have given Wuming an advantage in dealing with Azidakaha. That was all there was to the nemesis. Wuming could completely ignore the series of conditions that he had deduced earlier, and directly kill Azidakaha. Therefore, from the beginning, Wuming only needed to use the power of the root dragon to ignore all factors, and achieve the conditions to directly kill Azidakaha. Of course, Wuming only thought of this now, but there was a blind spot at the moment. Whether this body can produce the power of origin is another matter. While dodging the black mud tentacles, Wuming could not help but frown. Although when he returned to the box, Wuming adjusted the spiritual base to the perfect standard for a servant, Wuming was still unsure whether it could produce the power of origin. As the clones of the heroic spirits, the attributes of the servant's interface were fixed. Wuming's spiritual base was the same. Although Wuming had broken this rule a few times, there was a reason for it. When he fought against Garna, the last noble phantasm that Wuming used was a temporarily modified noble phantasm. The reason why it could be like that was because at that time, Wuming's servant identity was Sodlek, which was a character that Wuming had fabricated in history, so he could change it however he wanted. Secondly, the world at that time was the native world of the inhibitors, and the inhibitors had a lot of power at that time, so they did not want the humans to be burned down. Because of these 2 points, Wuming's spiritual base could be arbitrarily modified on the spot at that time. Also, relying on the power of the Holy Grail to modify the spiritual base, Wuming changed from Saber Sodlek to Caster Uruk Hyunryong. After all, the Holy Grail was a cheat, and Wuming himself was also a cheat, so it was not surprising that he could do this. Now, if Wuming wanted to modify the spiritual base on the spot, apart from being in the root, he had to rely on Wuming's own body, or his original body. The first time Wuming used the power of the root was when he faced Gidia. Although he could use it inexplicably, because Wuming's body had stayed in the root for a long time, his body had evolved, so Wuming, who often used his clones, was not very clear about it. However, it was the innate power of the root dragon, so it was reasonable for Wuming to master it. However, Wuming's experience of using the power of the root was only that one time. After all, since then, Wuming's body fell into the box garden world and disappeared. Now that he didn't have the Holy Grail, nor did he have any restraining power, and his main body was nowhere to be seen, Wuming had no way to change his current spirit base. Wuming clearly sensed the aura of his original body just now, but he couldn't sense it now. If Wuming didn't look for Shadora, he might be able to find his original body. But if he didn't look for Shadora, perhaps, no, it should be certain that something would happen to Shadora today. However, Wuming didn't regret it. Although he hated Mandela, he didn't hate Shadora. This little girl who worked hard for the community made him realize that Shadora was worth Wuming saving. Anyway, even if Wuming didn't save Shadora and directly went to the location of his original body, Wuming might not be able to find his original body. After all, Azidakaha was there. I'm afraid that my original body was covered by the black mud again. If there was anything that Wuming could think of that could conceal his original body's aura, it would be the black mud. Or perhaps, my original body is now in Azidakaha's body. While pondering, Wuming avoided the black mud tentacles, and arrived before Azidakaha. Roar! Azidakaha wasn't afraid of Wuming. He stood up in his human form and coalesced a huge blade from the black mud, slashing it at Wuming. Wuming raised his divine blade of salvation to meet the attack. Countless lightning of salvation attached to the divine blade of salvation exploded. In an instant, Azidakaha, who had already stabilized his body, pointed at Wuming. Countless black mud tentacles flew around Wuming and wrapped Wuming into a sphere that kept compressing. At this moment, a thunderous sound came from the sphere formed by the black mud tentacles wrapped around Wuming. Boom! Then, the black mud sphere slowly disintegrated, revealing Wuming in the center of the sphere, unharmed. Wuming's spirit base couldn't produce origin power on its own, but as an entity that had fused with Wuming's main body. The divine blade of salvation had also been strengthened to a certain extent during the Great Origin. While it couldn't completely suppress the black origin soil, it was still tainted with a bit of origin power. Combined with the divine blade of salvation's extraordinary nature, the divine blade of salvation should be able to deal with a certain amount of black origin soil. It should be noted that the divine saber of salvation could easily kill Azidakaha with a single strike. The best example was the divine saber of salvation's ability to kill Azidakaha with a single strike. But that wasn't enough. Just relying on the divine blade of salvation was not enough to kill the final trial's absolute evil, Azidakaha. After all, a quantitative change would lead to a qualitative change. Azidakaha had now become a vessel for secreting the black mud. Just relying on the divine blade of salvation was not enough. You're still somewhat capable, aren't you? Azidakaha said as a pair of black shadow-like wings appeared on his back. Then the black mud on Azidakaha's body spread over his wings. His shadow wings became tainted wings filled with black mud. Then let's continue. Let's continue our fight. Chapter 860. Shadora flew in the sky above the 54545 outer gate, and looked at the 54545 outer gate with a worried expression. She couldn't sense what was going on inside the gate. A day had passed. At this moment, the entire 54545 outer gate was completely covered by the black mud. However, the people of the 54545 outer gate and their communities had all evacuated from the 54545 outer gate because of Wu Ming's cover. After all, there was no effective way to stop the black mud from spreading. Everyone in the 54545 outer gate could only retreat. In the end, they relied on the boundary wall of the outer gate to stop the black mud from spreading. However, the boundary wall couldn't be used anymore. Not only that, but many places, or rather, the buildings of the entire 54545 outer gate had changed. The black mud seemed to have made a lot of irregular changes in the shape of the original buildings. Not only did it make the 54545 outer gate unrecognizable, but it also blocked the sky of the entire 54545 outer gate like a lush black forest. Moreover, the second change of the black mud also connected, making the 54545 outer gate look like a huge mountain with a lot of holes. One thing was certain. The entire 54545 outer gate had completely turned into Aziz Dakaha's black mud territory. Moreover, it seemed that the black mud had the ability to block detection. The people of the 54545 outer gate couldn't find out what was going on inside, including whether Wu Ming was alive or dead. There was no movement inside at all. However, the people of the box court couldn't just sit there and wait for death. The members of Salamandra who had retreated from the 54545 outer gate had already united a large number of communities in the surrounding outer gates to form a battle line around the 54545 outer gate. The purpose was to prevent the black mud from spreading. Although the black mud wasn't spreading now, who knew when the black mud would break through the boundary wall and start spreading? It wasn't too late to mend the pen after the sheep were lost, right? The reason why the other communities were so obedient was because Shadora had revealed that the enemy who attacked Glowing Flame Capital and the entire 54545 outer gate was absolutely evil. Moreover, the leader of this alliance was the strongest demon in the North District, Vera Za Ignifast, which was why they were willing to compromise. Moreover, there was nothing they could do even if they did not compromise. If the enemy was absolutely evil, they would definitely die if they did not unite. This was without a doubt. If they were united, there was still hope for survival. Shadora, so you're here, Mandela said in a heavy tone as he flew to Shadora's side. Big brother, will Master Villo be alright? Shadora looked at Mandela worriedly. Seeing his sister's expression, Mandela turned his head to the side. You're the ruler of the hierarchy. Don't always show such an expression. Whether Wu Ming was fine or not, they had to do their best to survive and think of a way to deal with AZ Dakaha. This was a matter of life and death. Although Mandela didn't answer Shadora directly, she understood what he meant. After all, they were siblings. It's hard to believe. If even Master Villo can't deal with the enemy, can we really deal with it? Shadora said as she looked at the changed outer gate of 54,545 outer gate. And our house. It changed completely in just a day. However, even if it didn't change, it would probably be destroyed by absolute evil. I've already sent out a distress signal to the other classes and reported this to the higher-ups of the box court. If nothing goes wrong, the Sky Army should be here soon. The so-called Sky Army was a special force formed by the upper echelons of the box court to suppress the humans in the final trial. Although not everyone knew about the existence of the Sky Army, Shadora naturally knew about it as the leader of the upper echelons. And Mandela was Shadora's assistant, so he knew about the existence of the Sky Army. Master White Yiksha just replied to me. She said she'll rush over from the East District soon. Don't worry, Mandela comforted Shadora. And Villo isn't weak. I think even if he can't kill absolute evil, he won't be killed by absolute evil. That's true. Shadora sighed and flew to the ground. Seeing Shadora leave, Mandela couldn't help but sigh. Of course Mandela, who didn't know Wu Ming very well, said this to comfort Shadora. As one of the oldest Godslayers, absolute evil wasn't even afraid of a 2-digit number. Even if Wu Ming was stronger than a 3-digit number, in Mandela's opinion, it was unlikely that he would survive after fighting absolute evil alone for a day. Absolute evil didn't move at the moment. Perhaps it was resting and recovering from the injuries caused by the battle with Wu Ming, or perhaps it wasn't injured at all, and just didn't want to come out for the time being. Either way, they had to be prepared. However, Mandela could only comfort Shadora like this. Shadora had probably already seen through Mandela's intentions, but she could only think so. This was because only by making everyone think that Wu Ming was still inside, delaying Azedakaha, could they create a winnable atmosphere. Otherwise, they might not be able to set up a defensive line around the outer gate of the 54545 division. Facing an enemy who did not put up a defense but ran away blindly, that would only lead to a faster death. I hope the Sky Army can come as soon as possible. If they only relied on Vera and the upcoming White Yiksha to deal with absolute evil, who had undergone an unknown transformation, they would probably be doomed. They could only rely on the Sky Army in the upper echelons of the temple. Then Mandela rode the fire dragon and flew down. At this moment, the intense battle was still ongoing in Azedakaha's Black Mud territory. Countless Black Mud attacked Wu Ming from all directions, while Wu Ming floated in place and chanted, "For victory, come to me quickly. Undying sun, please bestow upon me a shining steed, spirited steed, with the lifeline of my root dragon. I bestow upon the eternal glory. Bring me the shining wheel of light that symbolizes me." After Wu Ming finished chanting, the sun instantly erupted from Wu Ming's body. Wu Ming's entire body turned into a fireball. The flames burned hundreds of meters, incinerating the black mud within range. However, even the sun would burn out one day. The fireball incinerated a large amount of black mud, but to Azedakaha, who had turned the entire outer gate of the 54545 temple into a black mud territory, and could continuously produce black mud, Wu Ming's actions were useless. When the fireball burned out, a claw full of power attacked Wu Ming. However, Wu Ming had already begun chanting another spirit. "Fear the one with wings. Evil people and powerful people are all afraid of me with wings. My wings will bring you a curse. Evil people will not be able to hit me." Swoosh! As if he had accelerated in an instant, Wu Ming instantly left his original spot, and the owner of the claw missed. Upon closer inspection, it was the pitch-black Azedakaha. Wu Ming, who had flown to the other side of Azedakaha's team, steadied himself and sneered. "Don't always rush over after fainting. This trick has never worked on me from the beginning." However, Azedakaha also retorted with sarcastic words. "So what? You can't take advantage of me either." Then Azedakaha smiled smugly. "Don't forget, you are now trapped here by me." Chapter 861. During the day of constant fighting between Wu Ming and Azedakaha, as if excessive destruction would usher in new life, Wu Ming destroyed a large amount of black mud, but at the same time, a large amount of black mud was produced, causing the black mud to spread faster. It was said that it covered the entire outer gate of 54,545 in a day, but in fact it was only because the people outside the outer gate of 54,545 discovered that the black mud had spread to the boundary wall a day later. Moreover, the black mud did not stop spreading because of the boundary wall, but only because of Azedakaha's order to trap Wu Ming. The boundary wall just happened to be a dividing line. During this period, Wu Ming did not care about how the black mud eroded the outer gate of 54,545. After all, those who should be evacuated had already evacuated. At the same time, Wu Ming did not care about how the black mud gradually trapped him. Wu Ming just kept fighting with Azedakaha, and Azedakaha also gave him face. He turned the entire outer gate of 54,545 into his own devil's den, not only to besiege Wu Ming, but also to prevent others from disturbing the fight between Azedakaha and Wu Ming. Not only did he satisfy Wu Ming's desire to fight with Azedakaha, but he also prevented outsiders from interfering. As for why, it was because it was related to Wu Ming's plan. Although it seemed that Wu Ming was now trapped in this devil's den full of black mud, in fact, Wu Ming was indeed trapped. Whether it was entering the inherent barrier or leaving through the teleportation gate, they were all stopped by Azedakaha's magic. It had to be known that Azedakaha was rumored to have mastered over 1,000 types of magic. Although the final trial was absolutely evil, Azidakaha was still Azidakaha. He could still use over 1,000 types of magic. The boundary and portal were theoretically just the use of space. As long as magic was used properly, it could naturally be blocked. However, Wuming did not panic at all. After all, he did not want to leave just like that. Azidakaha was hostile to Wuming. This was true. In the continuous confrontation with Azidakaha, Wuming became more and more certain of this. Usually, people who had the black mud would become Wuming's enemy or treat Wuming as an enemy. However, Azidakaha was really serious this time. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was an obsession. As the final trial of humans, Azidakaha was obsessed with eliminating Wuming first instead of fulfilling his duties as the final trial of humans. This in itself was very abnormal. The rules of the box could not be violated by anyone other than Wuming. Although there were some people who took advantage of loopholes, they could only take advantage of small and harmless loopholes. It was simply impossible to take advantage of the box's loopholes. The humans' final trial was the same. Azidakaha, who had been released from the seal, didn't give the humans a trial. Instead, he was competing with Wuming here. This was something that was impossible to happen. It was not a problem to fight back against an enemy, but Azidakaha clearly wanted to fight to the death with Wuming before doing anything else. Perhaps because of the purity of the black mud, Azidakaha's enmity towards Wuming had risen to the level of obsession. The power of the black mud had even placed Azidakaha's duties as the final trial of humans behind his obsession with Wuming. Therefore, as long as Wuming was still around, Azidakaha would not take on the duties of the final trial of humans. Simply put, Wuming had a taunt on him that Azidakaha did not notice at all. Although Wuming did not want to taunt Azidakaha at first, he felt that this would restrain Azidakaha and prevent him from harming the outside world. In addition, Wuming had his own ideas. Therefore, he and Azidakaha fought in the Devil's Den for an entire day, or rather, an entire night. Azidakaha was released at night. Now, although Wuming could not see the weather outside, based on Wuming's sense of time, it was almost nighttime. After a day of fighting, Wuming more or less understood what he needed to understand. Do you still have time to be distracted? The 3-meter-tall Azidakaha took advantage of Wuming's momentary distraction to rush in front of Wuming. A huge dragon claw covered in black mud viciously pressed down on Wuming's face. Isn't that a given? After all, even if I'm distracted, you can't do anything to me. Ever since he started fighting with Azidakaha, Wuming's psychic energy had been released from his body. As long as anything came within 100 meters of him, Wuming could instantly sense it and react. Relying on the power of the Sun and Phoenix of the 12 avatars, this was why Wuming could deal with Azidakaha for a day. Using Giant to wrestle in close combat, using Vitality to recover himself from time to time, and whenever he was surrounded by black mud, he would use Sun to burn it, and then use Phoenix to move. Simply put, it felt like Wuming was playing with Azidakaha all this time. No, it couldn't be said that because, lightning, lightning, lightning. I am the conqueror who can defeat 1,000 with white, 10,000 with 1,000, and 10,000 with 10,000. Now, for me who stands on the side of justice, please shine brightly and bestow upon me divine power. I am the one who will crush all enemies and enmity from humans and demons. Wuming, who was facing Azidakaha's palm, quickly chanted the power of Thunder God. Wuming himself turned into lightning and quickly distanced himself from Azidakaha. At the same time, he also used lightning to injure Azidakaha, causing an extremely temporary paralysis effect on Azidakaha. Turning off the Thunder God avatar, Wuming's figure appeared, but the hand that Wuming used to fight with Azidakaha was pitch black as if it was poisoned. However, as if he had already adapted to this, Wuming didn't panic at all. Then, Wuming chanted the power of divine power again. A person with the supreme divine power of protection. The gods protect him, the demons hate him, and no enemy can get close to him. He is like a fountain of vitality that surges endlessly, granting the world equal protection. After he finished chanting, Wuming's arm returned to normal. Chapter 862. Sure enough, It's not only the blade of salvation that has the aura of origin, but so does my authority. In fact, Wuming had long discovered that his authority had a weak restraining effect on Aziz Dakaha, or rather, the black mud on Aziz Dakaha's body. After all, the 12 avatars were the same as the blade of salvation. They were existences that had been baptized together with Wuming in the origin, so they naturally carried the aura of origin. In other words, his authority also had the ability to restrain Aziz Dakaha, although it was very weak. Similarly, the vitality also had a certain recovery effect on the corrosive damage caused by the black mud, so Wuming, who previously did not dare to fight Aziz Dakaha in close combat, dared to do so now. However, because the recovery effect was not very optimistic, Wuming could not excessively come into close contact with Aziz Dakaha for too long. If he came into contact with him too much, the vitality avatar would lose its effectiveness. However, this power alone was far from enough. Whether it was the blade of salvation or the 12 avatars, they contained too little power of origin. Even if Aziz Dakaha was killed in an instant, Aziz Dakaha would be healed by the black mud. In addition, this place had now become Aziz Dakaha's black mud cave. If he did not clean up all the black mud, Aziz Dakaha's injuries caused by origin would completely disappear as soon as he came into contact with the black mud. No, perhaps even injuries not caused by origin would be healed by Aziz Dakaha. For example, right now, although Aziz Dakaha had injured Wuming in the previous exchange of blows, he had also been injured by a trace of origin power in Wuming's Thunder God avatar. However, a black mud tentacle approached Aziz Dakaha and gently touched him. Aziz Dakaha's injuries were immediately healed, and it was impossible to tell that he was injured at all. From this, it could be seen that Wuming was still unable to completely destroy Aziz Dakaha. Without power, you can't do anything to me. You can only be a lowly mouse in my cage, being toyed with by me. Ha ha ha. It was as if he was quite satisfied with Wuming's helpless look, but his laughter only added to the despair. Wuming wasn't a human. Wuming wasn't human. After adjusting his breathing, Wuming began to ponder. According to Az Dakaha, it seemed like he had never used his full strength and was only playing with Wuming. Wuming did not think that Aziz Dakaha was bluffing. Aziz Dakaha had once fought against millions of gods and was not at a disadvantage. Although there were only 3 digits of him, he was no weaker than the 2 digits of humans in the final trial. Just the god spirit level body created from his blood alone was enough to make him suffer. By the way, this information was obtained from Galji by Wuming's clone. This information was mixed in with the Lune runes from before. Perhaps it was because Aziz Dakaha was covered in black mud, but Wuming had never seen Aziz Dakaha use the blood clone technique. However, this technique should be considered passive and could not be used actively. Moreover, Aziz Dakaha's blood had probably been assimilated into the black mud. Did that mean this technique could not be used? Wuming was overthinking things. Since the blood had been assimilated by the black mud, didn't that mean the black mud was Aziz Dakaha's blood? Roar! Suddenly, Aziz Dakaha roared. Under Wuming's solemn expression, blurry things appeared from the black mud. There was no doubt that these were Aziz Dakaha's clones. Roar, roar, roar! These indistinguishable black clones roared in unison, and then rushed in Wuming's direction. Or it could be said that they were carried by the black mud and flew over. It seemed that Aziz Dakaha was not prepared to continue playing with Wuming. Coincidentally, Wuming had the same thought. God says humans are sinful. God says humans need to be purified. Thus, I bestow the flood upon my body. In the name of the Supreme King, I will grant the people of the world equal relief. Wuming slowly chanted the spirit of words until the Az Dakaha clone at the front was extremely close to Wuming. The spirit of words had just finished chanting. In an instant, an ocean-like wave surged out of nowhere from Wuming's back, washing away all of Aziz Dakaha's doppelgangers and a large amount of black mud. In an instant, the flood erupted. The flood that submerged the entire outer gate of 54,545 caused Aziz Dakaha to raise his height. He was clearly surprised by Wuming's move. Without stopping, Wuming extended his left hand and continued to chant other spirit of words. Thou hast violated the contract and brought sin to the world. Lord's day, sinners shall be punished. Crush their backs, dig out their bones, hair and brains and trample on their blood and mud. If I am the one who cannot approach the darkness, I will follow the words of the Lord and destroy thee. The flood changed color and turned black. At the same time, the flood also changed in nature. The black mud was being eroded by the flood that was mixed with twice the original power. It was quite shocking. But just the combination of the flood and annihilation avatars was not enough to have a serious effect on the black mud. And because of the mutual restraint, the black mud was also slowly devouring the black flood that submerged the outer gate of 54,545. I didn't expect you to have such a trump card. Aziz Dakaha praised Wuming. Whether it was the flood or annihilation avatars, Aziz Dakaha didn't know about them. Or rather, Wuming deliberately didn't use them in order to catch him off guard. But this alone isn't enough. Aziz Dakaha seemed to be mocking Wuming. The shadow wings on his back suddenly spread out, and a large amount of black mud seemed to be recreated. It swarmed out from Aziz Dakaha's back and increased the amount of black mud. It also accelerated the rate at which the black mud was eroding the Black Sea. But what surprised Aziz Dakaha even more was what came next. Lightning. 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 I am the conqueror who can defeat 1,000 with white, 10,000 with 1,000, and 10,000 with 10,000. Now for me who stands on the side of justice, please shine brightly and bestow me with divine power. Reaching out his right hand, Wuming chanted a new incantation. Countless thunderbolts mixed into the black flood. The black flood with thunderbolts was temporarily on par with the replenished black mud. At this moment, Wuming's two outstretched hands suddenly clasped together. I am the one who will crush all enemies and enmity between humans and demons. Suddenly, Wuming adjusted the Thunder God avatar to the maximum output. Suddenly, the area contained by the Black Sea, or rather, the entire outer door of the 54545 division, was filled with thunderbolts. The Black Sea instantly became a sea of thunderbolts. However, the large amount of thunderbolts didn't spread to the surroundings. Instead, they evaporated the entire Black Sea. The entire Black Sea was disappearing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Is his brain damaged? Or is it that he didn't control his moves well? Aziz Dakaha mocked Wuming's play of his own attack, canceling out his own attack. But then, Aziz Dakaha realized that something was wrong, because his entire black mud den was covered in fog. Chapter 863. What are you trying to do? Az Dakaha couldn't help but shout. The black ocean that had been evaporated by the Thunder God's incarnation had now turned into mist and filled the entire black mud cave. Moreover, from the outside, billowing white fog could be seen emerging from the numerous holes in the black mud cave, as if the interior was on fire. The thick fog had indeed attracted the attention of outsiders. What's that? Someone shouted. Some people noticed the mist that was coming out of the cave. Gradually, the large number of community members surrounding the 54545 barrier put down their work one by one and looked at the devil's den that was emitting thick fog. Many brave people flew into the sky, hoping to observe from a closer distance. Smoke? No, it's mist. Mandela rode a flying dragon into the sky. It would be easier to investigate the mist. After checking the defensive grace that he had prepared, Mandela piloted the wyvern in the direction of the fog to begin his investigation. In the sky not far away, White Yiksha was flying toward them. Because they knew the seriousness of the matter, the outer gates around the 54545 outer gate had been controlled by the North District's hierarchy and sealed off. As a result, White Yiksha could only move to the nearest outer gate that was sealed off and use his own methods to come over. White Yiksha, who had no convenient method, could only fly over. This power. The thick fog also attracted White Yiksha, who had just rushed over. This caused White Yiksha, who was about to land, to give up on his plan. Instead, he headed straight for the devil's den. Wuming had used flood in front of White Yiksha. The mist was very similar to Wuming's flood. Or rather, it had the exact same aura. How could it not attract White Yiksha's attention? In the temporary meeting room of the 54545 Outer Gate Alliance, Shadora, who was alone with Vera to discuss the situation, also ran out because of the mist. Vera was the same. Villo, Vera muttered softly. She jumped and flew up as well. Wait a minute, Master Vera? Shadora immediately followed after seeing this. Just as Shadora and Vera flew into the sky, the white Yiksha, who happened to encounter them, issued a warning. Don't get too close. I'm afraid the mist is corrosive. White Yiksha had witnessed the might of the outer sex sea of annihilation. Absolute Evil's clone had died without a trace. This fog probably had a similar ability. Lord White Yiksha. Have you arrived? Shadora was rather surprised to see White Yiksha here. I just arrived not long ago. When I saw the changes here, I immediately rushed over. White Yiksha nodded at Shadora and Vera. We rushed over because we saw the changes here, Shadora replied. Then, Shadora looked at the temporary base of the community. Taking a closer look, these communities seem to be very close to the boundary wall. If the corrosive mist were to spread, it would be terrible. Shadora asked. Lord White Yiksha, do we need to inform the surrounding communities to retreat? Although she was in the same class as White Yiksha, compared to White Yiksha, there was nothing wrong with Shadora asking White Yiksha whether it was strength or experience. However, Vera answered Shadora instead of White Yiksha. This is a gift from the Villo. It has the aura of a Villo. Vera meant that there was no need to retreat. Not only that, but Vera also gave White Yiksha the urge to rush in. Don't act rashly, Vera. Seeing that Vera had such an impulse, White Yiksha said to Vera. Then, White Yiksha turned to Shadora. Let's get the others to retreat first. After all, I don't know what's going on inside. Okay, Lord White Yiksha. I'll inform everyone now. But at this moment, a figure fell from the sky. That's Big Brother Mandela? Shadora was shocked. Why did Mandela fall from the sky all of a sudden? Could it be that he was in danger? Although they didn't know what happened to Mandela, White Yiksha and the others wouldn't watch Mandela fall just like that. Swish. Suddenly, White Yiksha shot out at the speed of a rocket, easily rescuing the fallen Mandela, and the wyvern carrying Mandela. Vera and Shadora also flew over one after the other. Big Brother Mandela. Shadora yelled and flew to White Yiksha's side. White Yiksha held the unconscious wyvern in one hand, and the unconscious Mandela in the other. His expression was rather solemn. No matter if it was the wyvern or Mandela's body, or rather, their skin was filled with burn marks. They must have been accidentally corroded by the spreading mist during the investigation. But don't worry, it's just a severe burn on the skin. White Yiksha said and handed the wyvern and Mandela to Shadora. Perhaps a severe burn on the skin outside the box was a serious injury, but it was only a minor injury inside the box. Moreover, Mandela was a subspecies of the fire dragon, and had a certain resistance to fire damage, so Mandela wasn't seriously injured. Shadora, after bringing Mandela back, immediately informed the surrounding communities to retreat by 10 kilometers and pay attention to any changes here. If there's no other way, retreat further. Yes, Sir White Yiksha. Shadora, who was concerned about her brother, nodded immediately and flew down with Mandela and the wyvern. Then, White Yiksha looked at the mist released by the demon's den, and said to Vera. It can even burn a subspecies of the fire dragon, and it looks like the aftermath. This mist isn't simple, White Yiksha said. Although she knew that Wuming was powerful, Wuming always brought her new surprises. The Villo is in danger, Vera said and was about to barge in again. Is this really okay? Perhaps because there were no outsiders, White Yiksha's rather strange words entered Vera's ears. Although the Villo isn't safe, it isn't dangerous either. I know that guy better than thou. No matter what, White Yiksha had the advantage over Vera in terms of time and understanding. That guy isn't someone who can be defeated easily, even if the opponent is absolute evil. Otherwise, Wuming wouldn't have been able to create such a huge commotion after fighting with Az Dakaha for a day. Although that was the case, it wasn't a reason to stop Vera. Knowing this, White Yiksha immediately flew in front of Vera and spoke again. Who knows, it might be a crucial moment now. If thou barge in, it might ruin the Villo's plan. Ugh. Vera was instantly embarrassed. It had to be said that this was exactly what Vera wanted. Indeed, after all, Wuming and Azedakaha had been fighting inside for a day. What if it was a crucial moment now and Vera suddenly barged in and disrupted it? It's better for us to stay on the periphery and observe the situation. However, at this moment, a heat wave that distorted space shot out from a corner of the demon's den and crashed into the boundary wall, causing a shocking explosion. Chapter 864. The timeline jumped forward a few minutes. The fog created by Wuming's thunder god, Avatar, had yet to spread outside. A large amount of fog was concentrated in the Devil's Den, which was not very permeable, and would not dissipate in a short time. First, the fog corroded the interior of the Devil's Den, and the interior of the Devil's Den was completely filled with black mud. Hiss! When the fog came into contact with the black mud, there was the sound of something being corroded. The corroded black mud had no choice but to passively endure it because the fog was too small. Unless the black mud filled the entire Devil's Den, it would not be able to do anything. What is this? Azedakaha recognized the nature of the mist. Azedakaha was surprised to see the true nature of the fog. It was a black sea of gas molecules, and these molecules carried the power of flood and annihilation. It was this power that was constantly corroding the black mud. However, as these gas molecules corroded the black mud, the fog molecules themselves were also dying. After all, the black mud also had the ability to corrode. When the gas molecules corroded the black mud, they would also be corroded by the black mud. It could be said that even if the black mud could only passively endure it, it would not suffer much. However, these gas molecules were originally sacrificial pawns. Their purpose was to provide cover for Wuming, so it did not matter if they were used up. Since it was to provide cover, Wuming naturally had plans to do something. As an existence with a similar mind, Azedakaha would not just wait for Wuming to continue. Don't even think about it. No matter what Wuming wanted to do, Azedakaha would not let Wuming have his way. As he spoke, Azedakaha opened his mouth. The inside of his mouth was also covered in black mud. It was so dark that no one could tell what it originally looked like. Only his black fangs were as sharp as ever. In this pitch-black mouth, flashes of flame suddenly appeared between the fangs and moved restlessly. In an instant, Wuming, who was hidden in the fog, could clearly feel that the world had begun to shake. Legend had it that the three-headed mystic dragon was a human king who was guided by the evil god of the sect of fire, Angola Manuel. Before he was defeated, he had destroyed a third of the world. This inheritance that destroyed a third of the world became Azedakaha's gift in the box court world. It was also known as the strongest gift of the lightning series, the Kvarina of the hegemon's halo. At this moment, the radiance of the Kvarina that Azedakaha spoke of gradually solidified. During this process, a trace of black aura climbed onto the radiance and dyed the Kvarina black. Without a doubt, it was the source of black mud. No matter what you want to do, I will kill you before you complete it. Azedakaha was prepared to use the Kvarina mixed with the source of black mud to completely eliminate Wuming. With that, Azedakaha spat out the Kvarina, which had been strengthened by the black origin soil, towards the ground. An ominous wave of extreme heat shot out from Azedakaha's mouth. It was a heat that could melt steel in an instant. Then an extremely strange scene occurred. A heat ray more than 10 meters in diameter shot out from the 3-meter-tall Azedakaha's mouth. Under Azedakaha's control, it shot straight towards Wuming's position, or rather, the position before the fog covered Wuming's figure. The fog that came into contact with the heat ray disappeared in an instant, and the fog near the heat ray evaporated completely. In the end, the heat ray hit Wuming's position and caused a violent explosion. Not only that, but the Kvarina continued to be released. In the end, the black mud cave was penetrated, and the Kvarina was spat out by Azedakaha. But at this moment, Wuming's voice entered Azedakaha's ears. Azedakaha was sure that Wuming was behind him. In other words, Wuming had dodged Azedakaha's prize technique. Perhaps it was the interference of the corrosive fog that caused Azedakaha's perception to drop for a moment, so he didn't notice Wuming's movement. As for Wuming, he had already started chanting the words of the phoenix, incarnation when the fog had covered his body. He arrived behind Azidakaha. However, before Azidakaha could get angry, a feeling of surprise rushed to his mind. For victory, quickly come before me. Undying sun, please bestow upon me a shining steed. The demonic whisper entered Azidakaha's ears, and at the same time, Azidakaha could feel a wave of heat spreading from his back. Immediately after, another sentence of strengthened words came out. Spirited steed, I, the lifeblood of the dragon of origin, bestow the eternal glory. Bring me the shining wheel that symbolizes me. The heat was mixed with the aura of a large amount of origin power. It was certain that Wuming was behind Azidakaha, and he was very close. But soon after, Azidakaha had doubts. He couldn't possibly have so much origin power, right? But what was certain was that if Azidakaha was hit by this move, there was a high possibility that he would be killed, ignoring the rules of the box court. It was a huge crisis. But Azidakaha wouldn't just sit there and wait for death. If Silent Wonder's attack hit Azidakaha, then Azidakaha might be able to insta-kill him. However, at such a close distance, if Silent Wonder was hit by Karina's wheel of hegemony, the Karina in his mouth, which had yet to be completely extinguished, once again ignited with a black light. Azidakaha abruptly turned his body and shot it out. A heat ray that was several meters long instantly covered everything in front of Azidakaha. Although the Karina's power and range weren't as strong as before because it wasn't charged, Azidakaha didn't think that Wuming could withstand this attack. Where are you attacking, Azidakaha? Wuming's figure appeared as he spoke, and Wuming's current position was right next to the heat ray that hadn't ended yet. Azidakaha was right. Wuming couldn't withstand the Karina mixed with black mud, but if Azidakaha couldn't hit Wuming, it would be a different matter. It could be said that if Azidakaha had released the Karina, Wuming would have died without a doubt. But Azidakaha had missed. How is this possible? Azidakaha's pitch-black pupils dilated a little. Clearly, he didn't believe that he had made a mistake. Chapter 865. At such a close distance, how could the three-headed demonic dragon, Azidakaha, who was the ultimate evil god of the sect of fire, make a mistake? In Azidakaha's perception, Wuming was clearly behind him. How could he have shifted his position? How could Azidakaha's Karina just miss Wuming by a hair's breadth? Whoosh! A few gusts of wind blew past Azidakaha's face. The fog that was slowly dissipating due to the heat rays was also accelerated by the gusts of wind, causing it to dissipate even faster. The multiple layers of wind will refract light. The principle of light refraction was simple. It was nothing more than the refraction of light through different media at different speeds. Azidakaha's guess was right. Wuming had used the storm incarnation to control the wind, allowing the multiple layers of wind to refract light. This caused Azidakaha's Karina to shift a little bit. As for how to do it, Wuming referred to Altoria's Wind King barrier. As the closest person to Altoria, Wuming was very familiar with everything about Altoria, including the Wind King barrier that Merlin had designed for Altoria to hide Excalibur. Altoria's Wind King barrier was not so much a noble artifact as it was a special magic trick. The principle was simple. It simply used the multiple layers of wind attached to the holy sword to change the refractive index of light to achieve the effect of hiding the sword, preventing the opponent from obtaining information about the weapon. However, the Wind King barrier could only achieve the effect of hiding and not refracting. It could not shift Wuming's figure, and it was even more difficult to shift Karina, which was mixed with black origin soil. However, with other assistance, there would be no problem. The fog that filled the Devil's Den was the product of Wuming's thunder, incarnation to change the form of flood and annihilation. Naturally, it was also Wuming's authority. Thus, it was relatively easy to control. The mist itself was a thin layer of water, but Wuming's mist was an even thinner existence. As everyone knew, water could be refracted. Fog's refraction effect was weaker than water's, but it could still do the same. Whether it was the fog that seemed to be blown away when Azidakaha used Karina, or the fog that combined with wind to shift Wuming's position, it was all done by Wuming. However, A simple refraction of light could not make Aziz Dakaha fall for Wu Ming's trick. Putting aside Aziz Dakaha's 3-digit strength, Aziz Dakaha was also considered a wise man. He was not stupid to that extent. Therefore, relying only on storm, flood, and annihilation was still insufficient. In the end, Wu Ming activated the rarely used magician incarnation. When the magician incarnation that could perform the miracles of the gods, the storm incarnation that brought with it multiple layers of wind, and the flood incarnation and the annihilation incarnation that were affected by the thunder god incarnation, the combination of these three brought about a trick that fooled Aziz Dakaha. The wind covered Wu Ming's figure, and the fog refracted Wu Ming's figure. The god's miracle transformed the two into something that could even deceive the evil god, the ultimate illusion. As Wu Ming spoke, he raised his head and looked at Aziz Dakaha with a pair of golden eyes. Wu Ming was not good at illusions, but that did not mean he did not know how to use them. Back in Britain, Wu Ming was influenced by Merlin's powerful illusions. He had a lot of experience in illusions, and today, it came in handy. Although Wu Ming did not put much effort into illusions, but with the combination of multiple powers, he finally achieved an ultimate illusion that could even deceive the gods. Aziz Dakaha's mistake was the best proof of Wu Ming's illusion. Just a trick to fool people. How dare you keep me in the dark? Aziz Dakaha was enraged. If Wu Ming could defeat him in a head-on battle, he would be convinced and would not be angry. After all, Wu Ming was the root dragon. Even if he was defeated by Wu Ming, there was nothing to be ashamed of. But Wu Ming had used a trick like illusions to get behind him. Putting aside the issue of identity, Aziz Dakaha was a three-headed demonic dragon who had mastered thousands of magic spells. It was a great humiliation that he was blinded by illusions. However, Aziz Dakaha did not need to worry about anger. He had no time to dodge. What he needed to think about now was how to deal with Wu Ming's sun, that had been compressed to the size of a palm, and was about to explode. The heat that he had sensed at the beginning was coming from this sun. Checkmate, Aziz Dakaha. With Wu Ming's smile, Aziz Dakaha was covered in the light of the sun. Outside the Devil's Den, the members of the community who had formed an alliance around the realm wall were terrified. After Shadora conveyed White Yiksha's instructions, they began to retreat. The huge heat ray that had pierced through the Devil's Den had destroyed a large piece of the realm wall. The aftermath of the explosion had affected many people. Although no one was killed, many were injured. Although the realm wall was not so strong that nothing could destroy it, it was not so easily destroyed. As a huge barrier that divided the community, the quality of the realm wall was naturally guaranteed. Not to mention, there was the existence of the realm gate on the realm wall, which increased the quality of the realm wall to another level. However, it was the strange heat ray that had shot out from the Devil's Den that had easily destroyed the realm wall. However, they could not be sure who had launched the attack just now. Was it absolute evil? Or was it a hero who was fighting absolute evil? However, they could be sure that it was absolute evil, or the hero who was fighting absolute evil. No matter who had launched the terrifying attack just now, the other person who could fight with the opponent for a day could be said to be a formidable expert. If these people had only taken the incident of the 54545 outer gate being submerged in black mud seriously before, they were now terrified. This was also why they had started to retreat without hesitation when they learned that White Yiksha had signaled for everyone to retreat. After all, this was something that could not be helped. A member of the community in the retreating team would occasionally look at the pitch-black Devil's Den behind them. If there was another heat ray like the one just now and it hit them, the consequences would be unimaginable. It was better to retreat for a while first. Then, he looked at White Yiksha and Vera who were floating in the sky and sighed in relief. Now the ruler of the East Burrow, White Yiksha, and the most powerful demon in the North Burrow, Vera, were covering for their retreat. Even if there was another attack like the one just now, there was nothing to be afraid of. Reality proved that this person was overthinking. White Yiksha and Vera were indeed covering for their retreat, but the two of them still had lingering fears from the attack just now. That was absolute evil's move. Chapter 866. White Yiksha's expression was extremely serious. He was absolutely certain that it was absolute evil Azidakaha's move. The strongest gift of the flash element, Farina, was formed from the inheritance that destroyed 1/3 of the world. Villa will be fine. Although Vera comforted herself, she was still worried about Wuming. Since Vera was already like this, White Yiksha was naturally not any better. Even if she retrieved the spirit core, she might not be able to deal with absolute evil. If it's really the end, However, before White Yiksha could finish speaking, the entire Devil's Den instantly turned red as if it was burning from the inside. Sensing the danger, White Yiksha immediately retreated. Then a blazing pillar of fire shot up into the sky. The entire sky was dyed red, and space began to distort from the heat of the pillar of fire. This is the flames of the sun. White Yiksha raised a hand and covered half of his face. The eruption of the pillar of fire caused a violent gale. The gale seemed to be blowing away the air, sweeping away some of the surrounding teams that had yet to completely retreat. Everyone felt suffocated for more than 10 seconds. After withstanding the strong wind with great difficulty, what came next was the extreme heat. The realm wall began to slowly melt, and part of the land outside the realm wall directly turned into magma. Among the alliance members who had yet to completely retreat, many things, such as tents, paper, and human hair, were directly ignited by the heat of the pillar of fire. Even many people's clothes were burning. Even Shadora and the others with the fire dragon bloodline could not withstand the heat. The sweat that they had just excreted immediately evaporated, and their bodies also felt a severe lack of water. Some ordinary people did not even sweat and directly fainted. Some special races were also affected. For example, the body of Aisha Ignafardes, who came to volunteer as support, even fluctuated as if she was about to die. Jack was so scared that he immediately used his body to protect Aisha. It could be said that if White Yiksha had not asked the alliance members to start retreating, many people would have directly evaporated because of the pillar of fire that pierced through the entire Black Mud Denver. After all, the Black Mud Cave covered the entire outer sect of the 54545. Although it was inconceivable, the fire pillars also covered the entire outer sect of the 54545. At such a close distance, White Yiksha could completely determine that the fire pillar in front of him had such an ability. Immediately following that, White Yiksha's expression changed because she realized that the pillar of fire had no intention of stopping. It was even accelerating the pillar of fire towards the sky. Not good. Seeing this scene, White Yiksha turned pale with fright. If a pillar of fire with such a range and power rushed into the sky, it would definitely smash a huge hole in the sky surrounding the box court. It might even affect a very large area of the box court curtain. This would definitely have a very serious impact on the box court. At that time, something would definitely happen to some of the races protected by the box curtain. For example, the vampires, who couldn't face the sun directly, would suddenly burn to death under the dangerous sunlight. However, someone was a step faster than White Yiksha. Swish! Vera rushed into the sky at an extremely fast speed like a hot knife through butter. It looked like Vera was prepared to block the powerful pillar of fire that rose from the ground by herself. Vera! White Yiksha cursed inwardly and immediately flew up. This pillar of fire was no trivial matter. Ignoring the range of effects, its power wasn't something that could be casually blocked. But so what? Didn't she need to block it if she couldn't block it? The answer was naturally no. White Yiksha was only complaining that Vera was prepared to take the risk alone. There was no other meaning. Therefore, White Yiksha immediately caught up to Vera. Vera, look at how quiet you are. Why are you always so impulsive? White Yiksha said to Vera as he flew at top speed. Because they will be in danger, Vera simply replied. Was it because she was a child of the community? White Yiksha glanced at the tiny people on the ground. Although direct sunlight was harmful to ghosts, it wasn't fatal. Vera didn't have to be so anxious, right? If Vera was really so responsible, the position of the North District's ruler would have been hers long ago. There must be other reasons. There's a Villo's aura in the pillar of fire. I have to help him resolve it before he makes a mistake. Vera meant that the Villo was the one who set the fire. As expected, it was for Wuming. White Yiksha immediately made a helpless expression. No matter what, this pillar of fire can't shatter the curtains of the box court. Otherwise, it will be troublesome. White Yiksha corrected his expression. I don't have any defense-type gifts. It's too late to summon astral beasts. Vera, do you have any good ideas? To be honest, if you asked White Yiksha to destroy a city and commit murder and arson, she wouldn't have any problems. However, when it came to protection and defense, she really had shortcomings. Furthermore, she had yet to retrieve her spirit core, so she was even more of a dabbler. White Yiksha had also exposed this shortcoming during the Absolute Evil clone surprise attack. Of course, this couldn't be blamed on White Yiksha. Everyone had their shortcomings. Furthermore, who asked White Yiksha to encounter such perverted crises time and time again? To deal with the doppelgangers of Absolute Evil, not to mention White Yiksha herself. Even her sworn enemy would have to put in some effort to annihilate all of them. Of course, if White Yiksha could retrieve the spirit core, she could also do it. If it was a normal attack, White Yiksha would naturally be able to defend against it. However, the pillar of fire this time was clearly not a normal attack. It looked like a fatal blow that Wuming had delivered to Az Dakaha. Regardless of whether Az Dakaha could block it, she, White Yiksha, had no way of blocking it for a while. Realm Gate? No. Vera's first thought was to use the Realm Gate to move the pillar of fire away. However, there was another Realm Gate on the other side of the Realm Gate. That might affect others. If it doesn't work, I can only release an equally powerful attack from the opposite direction to cancel it out. Although this method would cause a vertical explosion in the end, it might. No, looking at the range of the pillar of fire, the explosion would definitely affect some of the surrounding outer buildings. However, it was still much better than the curtain of the box being broken. In that case, I'll use the power of death to eliminate it. As a great devil born between life and death, Vera naturally controlled the power of death. Moreover, this would not cause an explosion. Vera's expression froze. She increased her flying speed and rushed directly to the top of the pillar of fire. Vera waved her hand. A large amount of black death energy filled Vera's surroundings and collided directly with the pillar of fire. It had to be said that this was effective. However, the range was too small. This pillar of fire affected 54,545 outer buildings. Vera could not completely block it. Leave the rest to me. White Yiksha also increased her speed. She was even faster than Vera just now. After all, White Yiksha was once the White Knight King. Vera had blocked many pillars of fire. She had to block the fish that escaped the net, no matter what. At this moment, the pillar of fire suddenly decreased its speed. Furthermore, it was slowly disappearing. If one were to ask White Yiksha when she was the most aggrieved, she would definitely answer that there was no time more aggrieved than now. Chapter 867. When Wuming released the sun, he chanted 2 lines of incantations in a row, which made the sun incarnation double in strength. Not only that, when Wuming used storm, annihilation, flood, thunder god, phoenix, sun, and magician, the power of the 7 incarnations accumulated was all stuffed into the sun incarnation by Wuming. This not only increased the sun, to the point where it could cause fatal damage to Az Dakaha, but also increased the range of the sun incarnation to the extreme. Moreover, the black mud was simply the best fuel for the fire of the sun that was mixed with the power of the source. Therefore, it was precisely because of this, as well as the support of the power of the source, that the pillar of fire that broke out from the black mud cave could spread throughout the entire outer sect of the 54545, burning the black mud of the outer sect of the 54545 to nothing. However, Wuming was not a reckless person. After the explosion, the pillar of fire formed by the flames was released towards the sky. This was done by Wuming to prevent the explosion from spreading to the people or things nearby. It could be said that if Wuming allowed the sun to explode at will, then even if the people of the Alliance retreated to a certain distance, they would still be directly vaporized. After all, this was the fire of the sun that burned the entire outer sect of the 54545, and more importantly, the surrounding outer sect might also be affected by the flames. However, if the pillar of fire were to explode towards the sky, it would not spread to the people or things around. But if the pillar of fire were to be allowed to soar into the sky, the curtain of the box would definitely be shattered. Therefore, Wuming added the power of annihilation to the sun. When the sun erupted to a certain extent, annihilation would be activated and cut the pillar of fire in the middle. As everyone knew, the pillar of fire was not a pillar, but a pillar-like object formed by the continuous eruption of flames. If it was cut in the middle, the first half of the pillar of fire would dissipate, and the remaining power of the second half of the pillar of fire would not be enough to pierce through the curtain of the box. It would not even reach that height. Wuming used this to prevent the pillar of fire from piercing through the curtain of the box. Moreover, there was a long distance between the curtains of the box and the ground, which allowed the pillar of fire to erupt for some distance. Once the fire had weakened, annihilation, which had finished its countdown, would cut off the pillar of fire. After all, if he used annihilation to annihilate the pillar of fire from the beginning, it was likely that it would not succeed. After all, the power of sun, at this moment, was far greater than the power of annihilation. He could only wait for the pillar of fire to weaken before cutting it in the middle to achieve the desired effect. It turned out that Wuming was right. After the pillar of fire was cut in the middle, the first half quickly dissipated, and the remaining half of the pillar of fire began to slowly dissipate due to the lack of momentum. Although White Yiksha and Vera didn't know what had happened, they were certain that it was Wuming's doing. He didn't need anyone to clean up his mess for him. He could handle it alone. What a headache. I got a big fright. White Yiksha sighed helplessly, as if he was relieved of his burden. It could be said that Wuming had once again refreshed White Yiksha's worldview. In short, the crisis of the box's curtains shattering had been resolved. However, this crisis was really child's play compared to the crisis of absolute evil. I wonder how absolute evil is doing. With this in mind, White Yiksha looked down. She wanted to see how absolute evil was doing. Clouds floated around White Yiksha, and at the same time, there were many white clouds that blocked White Yiksha's line of sight. It was obvious how high her current position was. If she was outside the box, it would be a life-threatening height for ordinary humans, but it wasn't considered high in the world of the box. It wasn't considered high for White Yiksha either. With White Yiksha's powerful eyesight, she could still see the ground clearly. Although she couldn't see everything clearly, it was almost there. The entire outer gate of the 54545 division had completely sunk into a basin-like structure, because this part of the land had completely evaporated. However, at this moment, the basin was not completely dry. Instead, it was filled with red magma. This magma was formed from the magma that had not directly evaporated. It filled the entire basin the size of the 54545 outer gate. Even the realm wall surrounding the outer door of 54,545 had stopped melting after half of it had melted because of the dissipation of the fire pillar. This extraordinary sun flame is actually able to easily melt the barrier of cultivation. If White Yiksha retrieved the spirit spark to recover her strength, she could also use the power of the sun to melt the realm wall. But she couldn't melt the realm wall so quickly. It was still the same sentence. As a separation area, the realm wall that carried the realm door wasn't easily destroyed. Only Azidakaha, who had fused with the black soil, and Wuming, who had the power of origin, could destroy the realm wall so easily. White Yiksha didn't know much about absolute evil, but she had been in contact with Wuming for so long, but she never expected Wuming to have such strength. White Yiksha was now more and more interested in Wuming's identity. Vera, who had been silent all this time, suddenly said and flew straight down. Vera's figure blew away the clouds, allowing White Yiksha to see the full picture of the ground. White Yiksha focused her eyes. It seemed like there was someone in the magma. Although she couldn't see clearly in the magma, it should be Wuming if nothing unexpected happened. What about absolute evil? White Yiksha suddenly realized this problem. With a trace of worry, White Yiksha suddenly swooped down and followed Vera. The person in the magma was indeed Wuming, but he was motionless at this moment. Other than his shoulders and head floating above the magma, the rest of his body was soaked in the magma. Moreover, A large number of cracks had appeared all over Wu Ming's body. Specks of blue magic power particles were emitted from the cracks, and he allowed the magma to cause secondary damage to the spirit base. His current appearance was not caused by the explosion of the sun incarnation, but the collapse of the spirit base due to overload. Before, he forcibly used 7 incarnations at the same time, and several of them were directly at the maximum output. Although this spirit base was adjusted to the top of the servant spirit base by Wu Ming, it still couldn't withstand the use of 7 incarnations at the same time. If it's the original body, it should be no problem at all, Wu Ming said weakly. If it was the original body, let alone 7 incarnations at the same time, even 12 incarnations at the same time wouldn't be a problem. Wu Ming had a deep understanding of the strength of his body. Although he was trying to be brave by using his incarnation on this spirit base, he had now achieved his goal. Wu Ming under the magma couldn't help but clench his hand. Suddenly, a sweet voice came from the sky into Wu Ming's ears. Villo. Wu Ming subconsciously looked up. It turned out to be Vera. Are you okay, Villo? Flying above the magma, Vera looked at Wu Ming, who was soaked in the magma, and felt a little distressed. It's all my fault. I'm sorry. Vera apologized to Wu Ming with shame. If Wu Ming didn't help her deal with Maxwell, this wouldn't have happened. However, Wu Ming shook his head. Don't blame yourself, Vera. Nothing happened to me. Or rather, it was as Wu Ming wished. As for why, at this moment, White Yiksha also came above the magma and asked Wu Ming nervously. Villo, where is absolute evil now? As if responding to White Yiksha's words, there was a surge under the magma at this moment. Chapter 868. The reason why White Yiksha asked Wu Ming about Azedakaha's whereabouts was because he knew that absolute evil could not be killed. Or rather, absolute evil could not be killed by Wu Ming, who was not human. The final trial of humans could only be passed by humans. Even if they really had the strength to crush absolute evil and kill it, absolute evil would revive again. That was the rule of the box court. White Yiksha did not know that Wu Ming could ignore the rules of the box court and kill absolute evil. That was why he was so anxious. After all, if absolute evil was still alive, then it must be like Wu Ming, staying in this magma lake. That was indeed the case. The entire magma lake began to fluctuate bit by bit, as if something was about to be released. Slowly, the entire magma lake began to shake violently. So it's still alive. Wu Ming, on the other hand, had an as expected expression. It seemed like he knew that Azedakaha had not been killed by him. After all, absolute evil can only be passed by humans. As a spirit, you naturally can't kill absolute evil. As White Yiksha spoke, he slowly landed beside Wu Ming and prepared to pull him up and take him away. Because it seemed like absolute evil would not immediately appear from the magma lake, they still had time to retreat. Vera also came to Wu Ming's other side, and prepared to cooperate with White Yiksha to rescue Wu Ming from the magma lake. Don't worry about me. This body is about to shatter. Leave first. Wu Ming shook his head and rejected their help. But my community also has a way to heal a spirit's body, Vera said pitifully. Vera did not want Wu Ming to leave just like that. If a hero who stopped absolute evil is sacrificed like this, it will be a huge blow to our morale, White Yiksha added. Moreover, the Alliance had already suffered a large number of casualties because of the fire pillars created by Wu Ming. If their morale dropped further, they would be completely finished. Wu Ming could not help but smile, then shook his head. I have no intention of sacrificing myself. Trust me. Although Wu Ming's tone was as weak as if he was about to pass away, his eyes were still full of vigor, and even a little happy. White Yiksha and Vera were rather puzzled. They looked at each other, attempting to find out what Wu Ming was talking about from each other. However, neither of them understood what Wu Ming meant. Do you guys believe me? If you do, then leave this place for now. Absolute evil will definitely fall into my hands today. Vera trusted Wu Ming unconditionally, but not White Yiksha. It wasn't that he didn't trust him, but that he didn't dare to take the risk. Wu Ming looked like he was seriously injured. If absolute evil killed Wu Ming, it would not only be a matter of morale, but there would also be no one here who could restrain absolute evil. Therefore, White Yiksha felt that it was best to retreat first. Otherwise, she could return the divine spark, retrieve the spirit core, and recover her former strength. In the worst-case scenario, White Yiksha could still use his final ability. Let me retrieve the spirit core. There's no need. Wu Ming instantly interrupted White Yiksha. Didn't I say that as long as I'm here, you just have to stay in the lower level? Although Wu Ming did not know if White Yiksha had any means to deal with Az Dakaha, White Yiksha's expression just now was more like she wanted to perish together with Az Dakaha. After all, White Yiksha was Wu Ming's friend. If it was someone else who wanted to perish together with absolute evil, Wu Ming might hesitate, but if it was a friend he knew who wanted to perish together with the enemy, Wu Ming would definitely be the first to object. Vera floated aside at a loss and did not speak. She just quietly watched the two of them talk. However, because the magma lake was shaking more and more violently, Vera also showed a hint of anxiety. White Yiksha, who also noticed this, was silent for a few seconds before finally sighing helplessly. Are you really okay with this? White Yiksha looked at Wu Ming's eyes very seriously. Wu Ming also responded with seriousness. Trust me. In the end, White Yiksha compromised and retreated with Vera. After White Yiksha and Vera retreated, Wu Ming looked at the magma lake that was becoming more and more agitated. Wu Ming had indeed expected Az Dakaha to still be alive, but it was not because White Yiksha said that the final trial of humans had to be completed by humans. After all, Wu Ming himself was a bug and did not need to care about the rules of the box court. Wu Ming knew that Az Dakaha was still alive mainly because of the information provided by Galji. Galji had said that to kill absolute evil, one had to solve the bestowal contest of the human's final trial. Furthermore, one had to break Az Dakaha's shoulders, head, and heart at the same time before killing him. However, because of the black mud at the root, Wu Ming considered these weaknesses useless. Wu Ming's clone had obtained more information about Az Dakaha from Galji in the nasalic space. Wu Ming had also asked Galji about the universe-like power that had instantly killed one of his clones. Wu Ming also told Galji that Galji had killed one of his clones. Galji was not surprised, perhaps because he had more or less guessed it. However, most importantly, Wu Ming already knew what the another cosmology was. According to Galji, Az Dakaha's another cosmology was called Avesta. Of course, the name was not important. What was important was the ability of Avesta to imitate the opposite of Az Dakaha's own cosmology of Zoroastrianism, and the cosmology of mankind that had to be crossed over. It could be used by Az Dakaha in a limited manner, and could be used to counteract the gift of the enemy. To put it simply, Az Dakaha's another cosmology allowed him to simulate the blessings of the enemy, and use the enemy's blessings to offset the enemy's blessings. It could be said that the more enemies Az Dakaha had, the more he could imitate and the stronger he would become. Moreover, as long as it was not the Zoroastrian or human cosmology, Az Dakaha would not be injured or even killed after activating Avesta. The gods of the Zoroastrian sect could not kill absolute evil, and humans lacked power. Other races such as gods and astrals could not pose a threat to Az Dakaha after activating Avesta. Az Dakaha didn't even put a 3-digit number of enemies in his eyes. As for 2-digit numbers, he could only look at them in his eyes. Therefore, Az Dakaha was known as one of the strongest godslayers. Wu Ming felt that it was not an exaggeration to call him one of the strongest in the box. This was also one of the important reasons why White Yiksha felt that Wu Ming could not kill absolute evil. Chapter 869. Wu Ming was neither a fire worship sect deity, nor a human. As long as Az Dakaha had the simulated cosmic atlas, it was impossible for Wu Ming to hurt or even defeat him. Wu Ming could ignore the rules of the box and kill Az Dakaha. If the sun, which had condensed the power of 7 avatars, hit the defenseless Az Dakaha, he could definitely kill him. However, Az Dakaha had the simulated cosmic atlas. If Az Dakaha had used the power of the simulated cosmic atlas, he might have been able to survive. Perhaps it was a trump card, but Az Dakaha had never used it. If there was a crisis, Az Dakaha would definitely use it. And this so-called crisis was just like what happened just now. Not to mention, after fusing with the origin black mud, Azedakaha's another cosmology might have undergone some changes. Therefore, Wuming knew that he could not kill Azedakaha. In other words, Wuming's goal from the beginning was not to kill Azedakaha, but something else. With that thought in mind, Wuming looked at the large whirlpool that had appeared on the magma lake. It was almost time for Azedakaha to appear. Walala! Like a carp leaping out of the water, Azedakaha broke through the magma and flew into the sky. At this moment, Azedakaha was still covered in black mud, but the amount of black mud seemed to be much thinner than before. Azedakaha's heart seemed to have become transparent. The huge heart kept beating, but other than that, it did not look like he had been soaked in magma, nor did it look like he had been hit by Wuming's sun avatar. But Azedakaha knew very well that he was almost killed. If he hadn't activated the another cosmology simulation in time, he wouldn't have been able to save himself. I have to say, my old enemy, I have underestimated you so. Then, Azedakaha opened his mouth again, and the black light began to condense. This was the sign of the Quirina. I have decided to kill you here and now. In the face of the Quirina, which was right in front of him, Wuming did not show the slightest hint of panic. You can't do it, Azedakaha. Although his voice was weak, Wuming had a smile on his face. He did not look like he was about to be killed. Then come and try. The black light in Azedakaha's mouth became more solid, and it looked like it was about to explode. Even now you still haven't noticed? Your heart. Wuming couldn't help but sigh. His sigh wasn't for anything else, but for the fact that Azedakaha hadn't discovered something yet. Azedakaha thought that Wuming was talking about his heart being exposed, but Azedakaha did not take it seriously. It's just my heart that's broken. The rule that you have to break my head, shoulders, and heart to kill me is no longer effective against me with power. Wuming was right. The rule was indeed ineffective against Azedakaha. So what if the rule is still there? You have to know that you are about to be killed by me. This time Wuming did not care. Is that so? Don't you notice that something is missing? Azedakaha was stunned. What? After being reminded by Wuming, Azedakaha realized what he had lost. Die. Without another word, the enraged Azedakaha spat out the Quirina that had fully materialized from his mouth. The black light of destruction covered Wuming and gradually covered the magma lake in a semicircular shape. It began to spread to the entire 54545 outer gate. A large number of people in the Alliance army who were affected by Wuming's sun pillar of fire fell unconscious. The rest of the people were relieved because of the disappearance of the pillar of fire. But the black light that followed made the people in the Alliance army who had not yet fallen unconscious suck in a breath of cold air again. They had not even seen the face of absolute evil, and they had been almost wiped out by the aftermath of one after another. In any case, after this battle, after experiencing the disaster of absolute evil and the hero fighting against absolute evil, the aftermath of the battle between the two, for these people, this was definitely an indelible memory full of memories. The same was true for White Yiksha. Let alone experiencing it, she could not even see a battle of this level. What is it this time? White Yiksha felt helpless about the black light that gradually covered the entire magma lake. Do you have to attack with such a large range every time? However, White Yiksha also gave up. Anyway, the entire 54,545 outer gate had been reduced to a battlefield, and it was almost destroyed. As long as the remaining people did not have any accidents, it would be fine. But Vera, who was with White Yiksha, muttered Wuming's name and looked at the spreading black light. Wuming was in the semicircular black light at the moment. Although White Yiksha also believed in Wuming, she still could not help but worry. I hope nothing happens. At this point, she could only choose to believe in Wuming. White Yiksha now regretted that she had promised Wuming not to take back the spirit, but just in case, she still had to prepare. If this black light continued to spread, then she would have to use her own strength. But Wuming was right. She just needed to believe in him. The black light seemed to be stuck and suddenly stopped spreading. Then, the black light began to shrink bit by bit. Villow's methods. White Yiksha heaved a sigh of relief. At least Wu Ming did not want them to see that he was about to die. The people from the alliance also heaved a sigh of relief. After all, the danger was temporarily resolved, which meant that they could live a little longer. Taking advantage of this opportunity, the people from the alliance sped up their retreat. As long as there were no major injuries, they carried the injured and ran. "You bastards, slow down!" Although Mandela had already woken up, his body was still very weak. At this moment, he was being carried away by a few members of Salamandra. Coincidentally, these people were Mandela's trusted aides in Salamandra. But because of the bumpy ride, Mandela's entire body was in pain. "I'm fine. Put me down. Where's Shadora? She's the most important person in Salamandra." Although Mandela was burned unconscious by Wu Ming's mist, it was not to the extent that he could not walk on the ground. But at this moment, his hands and feet were held by these trusted aides and he could not use his strength at all. He could only scold these people and ask them to put him down quickly. However, Mandela's scolding was incredible. His trusted aides used all their strength and sped up their retreat. "Sir Mandela, we can't slow down. After all, we still don't know if there will be danger later." Yes, Sir Mandela. We were appointed by Lady Shadora to take care of you. Your life is the most important thing to us. Lady Shadora still has other companions by her side. Our mission is to escort Sir Mandela to a safe place. You'd better not talk, Mandela. Be careful not to bite your tongue in the wind. As they spoke, they sped up their legs again. Some of them had even started using the blessing of acceleration. As a result, Mandela was jolted even more severely, to the point where he could no longer speak. At this moment, Mandela could only let out meaningless roars. However, when his trusted aides heard this roar, they thought that Mandela's old injury had relapsed and sped up again. They thought that when they reached a safe place, they could rest assured and find a doctor to treat Sir Mandela. They completely ignored Mandela's murderous gaze. How sad. Chapter 870. In the magma lake, where Wu Ming and Aziz Dakaha were located, Aziz Dakaha was forced to freeze. Golden chains extended from the lava lake and wrapped around Aziz Dakaha's body, locking him tightly in the air. However, the chains did not lock him in from all directions. Although it was strange, Aziz Dakaha could not move. At the same time, the Kfarina of the hegemon was also locked by Aziz Dakaha. This is. Even though Aziz Dakaha was immobilized by the golden chains, he could still speak. My Kfarina. In his free time, Aziz Dakaha still had the time to marvel at the disappearance of his gift. At this moment, Wu Ming's voice entered Aziz Dakaha's ears. What a pity, Aziz Dakaha. Aziz Dakaha looked down. Wu Ming was still soaked in the lava lake, but the cracks on Wu Ming's body were getting bigger. It looked like he was about to disappear. Is this the power of the origin power? It is indeed powerful, ha ha ha. Aziz Dakaha was not depressed about being captured. Instead, he laughed loudly. There is no choice. If you could realize that everything I did was for my body, you would not have lost. Aziz Dakaha was one of the strongest people in the box court. Moreover, he had the origin black soil. Aziz Dakaha had the ability to stop Wu Ming from finding his body. That's right. Wu Ming's goal from the very beginning was to find his body. Wu Ming did not want to cause trouble for Aziz Dakaha. He only wanted to find his body after saving Shadora. In the end, Aziz Dakaha attacked Wu Ming. Wu Ming and Aziz Dakaha fought for a day in the Devil's Den just to find out if Wu Ming's body was in Aziz Dakaha's body. After confirming that his body was hidden in the form of a ball of light in Aziz Dakaha's heart, Wu Ming began his plan. He used the fog to cover himself and approached Aziz Dakaha at lightning speed. He used a power that even his spirit base could not withstand to attack Aziz Dakaha. He wanted to break open the black soil around Aziz Dakaha's heart and reveal his heart. Once it was revealed, everything would be easy. At an extremely close distance, Wu Ming and his body would form a connection. Wu Ming's consciousness would then be able to return to his body. The moment he returned to his body, Wu Ming felt that his injuries had healed. The black soil was also expelled from his body. Coincidentally, Wu-Ming's origin power of the Sun Avatar had the power of the origin power of the 7 avatars. The last trace of the black soil was removed from his body. As a result, Wu-Ming was completely liberated. A voice that could not be understood by the box court world sounded from the lava lake. Although it could not be understood, the voice had a strong penetrating power. Not only did the people around the 54,545 outer gate hear it, but the entire North District, the entire box court, from the no-name to the upper levels of the box court. It could be said that everyone in the box court heard it. The experts hidden in the box, such as the 3 digits, and even the rare 2 digits, all looked in a certain direction. That direction was the place where the voice came from, the North District's middle outer door of the 54545. Anyone who heard the voice could understand that a powerful existence that they could not afford to offend had come to the box. In the middle of the lava lake of the outer door of the 54545, a huge white figure slowly rose from the lava lake. It was a huge dragon, a dragon that could cover the entire outer door of the 54545. Because of its huge size, this figure only revealed its head, shoulders, and some of its claws. At this moment, Wu-Ming was sitting on the dragon's head, paralyzed. To be honest, after my body was affected by the black mud, it unexpectedly grew a step further. Wu-Ming said as he touched his head. The dragon, on the other hand, had some strange feelings. After all, the dragon was Wu-Ming. Him touching his own head was very strange. Wu-Ming had already mastered the ability to control 2 bodies with one consciousness. After his consciousness entered the main body, the originally abandoned spirit base was once again used by Wu-Ming. However, it was about time for this spirit base to be used. Bang! Like glass shattering, Wu-Ming on the dragon's head instantly shattered, turning into little magic particles and returning to the world. Now it was time to deal with the problem of Azedakaha. I have to say, Azedakaha, you are the second strongest person I have ever met, but in the end, you will still be defeated by me. The dragon spoke slowly. Unlike Wu-Ming's youthful voice in the spirit base state, the dragon's voice sounded somewhat ancient. However, this was his real body, which gave Wu-Ming a strong sense of belonging. At the same time, Wu-Ming raised his dragon claw. Countless golden chains wrapped around the dragon claw, extending down to the bottom of the magma lake, and wrapping around Azedakaha's claws. That's right, this was the one that had entangled Azedakaha, Wu-Ming's heaven's lock, Enkidu, the one that had not evolved before the root had obtained it. The 5 fingers of the dragon claw moved slightly, and Azedakaha, who was bound by the heaven lock, could not help but descend, and was about to land on the dragon claw. However, Azedakaha wasn't going to give up so easily. Activate a Vesta. Counteracted in turn, simulate in another cosmology. In an instant, Azedakaha once again activated the simulated universe in an attempt to break free from Wu-Ming's control. However, there was a flash of light, and 4 or 5 golden swords instantly pierced Azedakaha's body. The simulated universe that had just been activated immediately lost its effect. As for Azedakaha's other blessings, they were all sealed by the strengthened golden sword. By the way, as soon as Wu-Ming's consciousness returned to his body, he activated a total of 12 avatars. What's this? Azedakaha exclaimed in surprise. The golden sword that split the godhead, one of Welaslana's 10 avatars. If one were to say that Welaslana's authority was fused with Meckel's authority, and was modified by Wu-Ming to suit himself, then the golden sword was the only authority that could still see the shadow of Welaslana's authority. It was no wonder that Azedakaha was so shocked. He now realized that many of the abilities that Wu-Ming used were similar to Welaslana's avatars. When I killed Welaslana in the other world, I obtained his authority. After fusing and modifying it, it has now become my one and only authority, Wu-Ming explained casually. To think that I would lose to the same move again. This is fate. Azedakaha chuckled quietly. However, Azedakaha still had some tricks up his sleeve. Poochie. Azedakaha's blood vessels seemed to have exploded, and black liquid began to flow out of his body. It was the source of the black mud. Wu-Ming's son had removed the black mud from Wu-Ming's body, but Wu-Ming did not remove the black mud from Azedakaha's body, So Azedakaha still had the power of the black mud. However, this was also Azedakaha's biggest failure. Because mutual restraint means that I can deal more damage to the creature that is possessed by the black mud, Azedakaha. Chapter 871. Wuming's formless power of origin continued to flow from his body to his dragon claw. Countless white flames were born. This was the fire of origin produced when the concentration of power of origin reached its peak. It could cause obvious damage to the black mud. The black mud gushing out of Azedakaha's body seemed to have met its natural enemy. It was constantly being burned by the flames, and as the black mud erupted from time to time, the flames would also burn fiercely from time to time, increasing the efficiency of the flames. But no matter what, the result would not change. The black mud gushing out of Azedakaha's body would inevitably be burned to ashes by the white fire of origin. Not only that, but even the Enkidu that locked Azedakaha in the sky was filled with a large amount of power of origin. Roar! Azedakaha couldn't help but let out a painful roar. If you didn't use the power of the black mud, you might be able to live a little longer, Wuming said regretfully. Unlike the state of the spirit clone, Wuming's power of origin was beyond imagination. And this endless source of power was the black mud of Azedakaha. It could be said that it was the nemesis of the black mud. It was like seeing a fire and trying to extinguish it with straw. The straw would only be burned by the fire. If Azedakaha had released all the black mud in his body in his previous state, it would have been easier for Wuming to deal with him. But unfortunately, the black mud on Azedakaha's body had been greatly reduced by Wuming's son. But this had no effect on Wuming. Gradually, Azedakaha's body turned pure white. That was the original color of Azedakaha's body. It seemed that the black mud on Azedakaha's body was almost completely burned away. Otherwise, the black mud would have been able to wrap around Azedakaha's body. Roar! Azedakaha didn't answer Wuming's question, because the burning of his origin power was causing him so much pain that he wanted to die. He kept howling. Wuming could understand this kind of pain. When Gitya had detonated the black mud and injured Wuming, Wuming had also experienced this kind of pain. It was not only physical pain, but also mental pain. It was as if there was no solution, and he could only passively endure it. It was as if he was in hell. Although what was being burned was the black mud, Azedakaha still felt pain. As long as there was a trace of the black mud left, he would not be able to escape this pain, this extremely fatal pain. I have indeed lost. Azedakaha was finally able to speak instead of howling. Perhaps because the black mud had been reduced to a minimum, Azedakaha's body had basically turned white. Only a trace of black could be seen on his limbs. Wuming quietly looked at Azedakaha and did not interrupt him. Instead, he waited for him to continue speaking. However, after Azedakaha finished speaking, he did not speak again. It was as if he had run out of energy and could not speak. Gradually, the black mud completely disappeared. The flames of the origin were also extinguished because of the disappearance of the black mud. Azedakaha's dragon body turned from black to pure white. His shadow wings also disappeared. He was now like a three-headed lizard, locked in Wuming's dragon claws by the heavenly lock. Reality proved that the black mud had indeed been completely burned away by the flames of the origin. Under Wuming's command, the celestial lock loosened slightly. The pure white three-headed dragon that was still unable to escape the celestial lock, its four limbs drooped loosely towards the ground. Azedakaha's left and right heads also drooped naturally. Only the head in the middle seemed to be struggling helplessly before it slowly lifted its head. Its black and white eyes carefully looked at Wuming. Then Azedakaha spoke. Dragon of origin, this is indeed your victory. However, absolute evil that you killed will still be born. This is a trial that humans must overcome. As someone who had temporarily become Wuming's kin because of the black mud, Azedakaha now clearly understood what the dragon of origin was. At the same time, Azedakaha no longer called Wuming an enemy. Because now, he was the final human trial's absolute evil Azedakaha without the black mud. He was no longer Wuming's kin. Your identity and status are indeed above the world. However, the world will not completely give in because of your interference. Even if I cannot be resurrected, a new absolute evil will be born for humans to test. As Azedakaha spoke, his head in the middle gradually lowered. You don't have to worry about the future. Wuming did not have any ill intentions. He was just stating the truth. As he was about to die, he could not see the future. Aha. You're right. Being able to let go of everything and enter a deep sleep is not bad. Azedakaha laughed as he looked at Wuming. He began to talk to himself. It's a pity that humans did not surpass me. With that, Azedakaha's head drooped down, and there was no more movement. He's already gone? Although Azedakaha looked like he was asleep, he was indeed dead. At this moment, of the two dragon horns on Wuming's head, the one at the back shone. The light shone on Azedakaha's body as if it was scanning him. Then, a cold but slightly emotional female voice entered Wuming's mind. Master, it's confirmed that Azedakaha is mentally dead. Thank you for your hard work, Kalas. Wuming's voice was filled with emotion. The female voice that appeared in Wuming's mind was Wuming's magic attire. It was an extra sister machine of the same model as Ilya's Ruby and Mayo's Sapphire Sophia, Lapis Kalas Balit. This crown-style magic attire followed Wuming's body to the box garden world. Of course, Enkidu also came with it. After confirming that Azedakaha was dead, the heavenly lock around Azedakaha's body was dispelled. Then it wrapped around Silent Dragon's arm and returned to its original position. Thank you for your hard work, little N. Wuming's hard work was indeed related to the two of them helping to deal with absolute evil and checking on absolute evil's death. But more importantly, it was Wuming's gratitude to Enkidu and Kalas for protecting his body in the box garden world. He thanked them for protecting him. Chapter 872. What was there to protect? Because Wuming saw it. After all, it was the experience of his original body, so Wuming, who had returned to his body, would naturally see the past experience in an instant. If he had to say something, it could be said that this was the only special vision. At this moment, Wuming slowly closed his eyes, preparing to digest the things he had seen before. The moment Wuming returned to his body, he saw all the experiences of his body in the world of the box court. However, because Azedakaha was still in front of him, Wuming did not look at it in detail. Now that Azedakaha had been destroyed, Wuming could read it again. Back then, when the box court had just been established, Wuming's body fell from the sky into the box court, and coincidentally, it fell at the location where No Name used to be. At that time, No Name had not yet established a community in that location, and the surrounding area was even a wasteland. Of course, most of the areas in the box court's early days were wastelands, because there were not many people in the box court when it was first established. Especially the outer sect with the lower numbers, it could be said that in the beginning, there were unimaginably few people in the 7-digit outer sect. Similarly, because the box court's early system had not yet been established, the box court could be said to be very chaotic at that time. Wuming, this thing that exuded a powerful aura, also attracted a lot of attention. Many forces and even individuals came to the 7-digit outer sect to investigate, but the result was naturally to no avail. As for why, it was because they could not find any abnormalities. It was because the black origin mud covered up Wuming's aura, and the black origin mud sealed Wuming together with it. At that time, Wuming's consciousness had already returned to the big origin, so naturally he could not move. However, Wuming's body was still suffering from the corrosion of the black origin mud. So Kalas and Enkidu combined the power of the black origin mud in Wuming's body to create a light membrane. They turned Wuming's body into a ball of light, sealed him together with the black origin mud, and buried him deep underground to prevent the black origin mud from flowing out. The two of them had experienced a lot with Wuming, and had seen the power of the black origin mud. In their opinion, if Wuming had consciousness at that time, he would have made the same choice. The facts proved that this was indeed the case. If Wuming still had consciousness at that time, he would have let the two of them seal the black mud together with his own body if there was no other way. so that the black mud would not leak out. However, in that case, the black origin mud could only continuously corrode Wuming, who was also inside the ball of light. Wuming did not think much of it. After all, his injuries could slowly recover, but those who were injured by the black origin mud would not be healed so easily. This was also one of the reasons why Wuming did not want the black origin mud to flow out. Fortunately, the black origin mud was boundless water and did not have a source. Once it was drained, it would completely disappear. In addition, Wuming's body was constantly producing origin power, so Wuming's body did not suffer too much damage. At most, he would feel a little pain. However, since Wuming's consciousness was not in his body, he naturally could not feel any pain. Therefore, Wuming did not blame Kalas and Enkidu for Wuming's actions. Although this was the case, Kalas and Enkidu had always placed Wuming first. If they did not understand Wuming, the two of them would not have chosen to seal the black origin mud and Wuming's body. Instead, they would have allowed the black origin mud to flow into this world and protect Wuming's body from harm. However, if they did that, Wuming would definitely be furious when he found out about their actions. Therefore, the two of them chose to seal the black origin mud and Wuming's body. However, they did not choose to sacrifice Wuming for the sake of the world. Kalas and Enkidu both understood that if they did that, Wuming's body would continue to be corroded by the black origin mud. Although it would not kill Wuming, it would still cause serious injuries to him in the end. Therefore, after the two of them chose to seal Wuming's body together with the black origin mud, they also chose to take the damage for Wuming. As Wuming's personal belongings, even if the two of them chose the world, they would not give up on Wuming. The true meaning of being Wuming's personal belongings was to have both of them. Within the sphere of light, Enkidu extended his chains to their maximum length, completely wrapping around Wuming's body, while Kalas converted all of her mana into 100% defense, buffing Enkidu and Wuming's bodies. As a result, most of the black origin mud's connection with Wuming was severed. Only a small portion of the black origin mud in Wuming's body was still corroding Wuming's body. However, the endless amount of origin power he produced resisted it, so Wuming's body did not suffer much damage. However, Enkidu and Kalas suffered greatly. As existences who had followed Wuming for a long time, they had also produced a trace of origin power when they were in the origin. It was by relying on this trace of origin power that the two of them were able to resist the corrosion of the black origin mud and protect Wuming's body. However, it was precisely because they had origin power that the two of them continuously endured the pain brought about by the black origin mud. By the way, Kalas had used her ability to scan Wuming's consciousness, and determined that Wuming's consciousness had automatically returned to the backup machine in the origin because he could not bear the pain brought about by the black origin mud's explosion. Also, although the explosion had also affected Enkidu and Kalas, the two of them were unexpectedly only slightly affected by the explosion, while Wuming seemed to have taken the brunt of the damage caused by the black origin mud. Under the circumstances where they were not injured, the two of them chose to seal the black origin mud in Wuming's body, protecting both the world and Wuming's body, while quietly waiting for the day when Wuming would find his body. It had to be said that Wuming was quite angry when he saw this scene. What they did was no different from slow suicide because they could not resist the corrosion of the black origin mud at all. If possible, Wuming really hoped that the two of them would have allowed the black origin mud to corrode Wuming. Although it was impossible to guarantee that the two of them would not be corroded by the black origin mud, they could have attracted a lot of firepower. Although it was just a guess, it made sense that Wuming had attracted the firepower when Gidia detonated the black origin mud. After all, Wuming was a good fuel for the black origin mud. Even if he had to take a lot of damage, it would not have been a big deal. After all, Wuming's body could produce an endless amount of origin power, so he was not afraid of the black origin mud. At most, he would be seriously injured. Speaking of which, it was really strange. Kalas and Enkidu were willing to sacrifice themselves for Wuming, while Wuming, who saw this scene, was also willing to let himself attract the firepower. It was really contradictory. However, it was also because of this that the bond between Wuming, Kalas, and Enkidu was manifested. It was also because of this that Wuming said emotionally to the two of them, Thank you for your hard work. But in the end, the two of them still survived. Even if Wuming's consciousness was not present, he would not just wait for the two of them to suffer continuous damage and slowly die. This was because Enkidu's body chains and Kalas's body crown were tightly attached to Wuming. Because of this, the origin power in Wuming's body seamlessly acted as a reinforcement. The origin power was transmitted to the two of them, allowing them to successfully resist the Black Origin Mud and survive until now. Because of the Black Origin Mud, Wuming's aura had been concealed very well. Many people who had established a community in the outer sect of 210-5380 did not discover any traces of Wuming. It seemed that they had completely treated the legend of a mysterious object that had once fallen here as a mere story. Day after day passed. Gradually, Wuming completely cleaned out the Black Origin Mud in his body. Kalas and Enkidu also had the support of Wuming's origin power to slowly devour the Black Origin Mud. And when the amount of Black Origin Mud decreased to a certain extent, Wuming's powerful, mysterious, and noble aura leaked out. As a result, Wuming's aura caused the surroundings to change. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.